The anime already starts off with that heavy atmosphere, showing the mind of a Japanese guy who is the very embodiment of corporate misery. This guy was the master of living just to work. Every single day, it was the same routine. Wake up early, get squished like a snack inside a packed train on the Tokyo subway, put up with an annoying boss, and if he was lucky, catch the last train car at night just to get about 4 hours of sleep before resetting the cycle. He wasn't really living, he was just existing on the server of modern Japan. His life was so monotonous that if it were a graph, it would be a straight line. But since fate loves a plot twist worthy of an Isekai script, his game changed. He kicked the bucket in his previous life and reincarnated in another world. The first thing he notices when he opens his eyes is that his field of vision has changed. He looks down and sees those chubby, cute little baby hands. He's like, where are my calluses from typing spreadsheets in Excel? He realizes he's in the body of a very small child. Curious as ever, the kid runs to the window to check out the map where he spawned. He sees a huge kingdom with a medieval look he barely recognizes, but it gives off that epic adventure vibe. But his piece lasts less than the battery on an old cell phone. His personal maid comes into the room, sees them hanging out the window, and totally freaks out. She rushes over, picks him up, and gives him that classic lecture about how it's dangerous, that he could fall and end up as a pancake down there. Van looks at her and thinks, wow, she definitely watched all the seasons of Game of Thrones and knows that windows and noble kids don't mix. Being a well-mannered lord, he apologizes and makes up an excuse, saying the view outside was so magnificent that he got hypnotized. The maid, whose name is Tio, freezes on the spot. She looks at him like she's seen a ghost and asks, "Where did you learn such difficult words, my little lord? You're only 2 years old." At that moment, Van totally freaks out. 2 years old? How am I already using this PhD level vocabulary at this age? He realizes that even though he has some wild, vague memories of already living there, his adult Japanese consciousness has finally fully booted up. It's the classic reincarnation case we see on internet forums. He looks at Tio and confirms, "All right, your name is Tio, and you take care of me, right?" When she happily confirms, he does a mental checklist. "My name is Van Nay Furl." Tio almost has a fit of joy because he managed to say the family's difficult last name without stuttering. But Van doesn't stop there. He wants to show that his processor is running just fine. He starts reciting the family tree to see if he remembers everything. He says that his father is Jalpa, the Marquis Fertile, a guy who looks like he wouldn't accept anything less than a 9 on a test. His older siblings are Mursa and Yard. Van just wonders where these people disappear to during the day, because the mansion is like a giant map. That morning, there's that family breakfast that feels more like a UN summit meeting. We see Marquez Jalapa Balatifer sitting at the head of the table, radiating that "I'm the boss of this place" vibe. The oldest son, Murcia Delago Fertile, is just chilling there. The second one, Yard Fertile, always seems to be on edge. And the third one, Esto Fertile, well, the name says it all, right? If you ask me, this family has names that sound like they were generated by a broken keyboard, but we respect the hype. While everyone is there eating medieval delicacies, Van is being treated like a god by the servants. They praise him just for holding the spoon, and it's a celebration if he doesn't spill his juice. He starts to feel like he's in one of those elite host clubs where you're pampered just for existing. Am I a VIP customer and nobody told me? That's what he thinks, but the truth is, he's there with 100% of his memories from Japan, trying to figure out how this world's magic system works. The Marquis decides to break the ice and asks Yard, "So son, what are you going to study today, so you won't be dead weight in the kingdom?" Yard, sweating bullets, answers that he's going to focus on fire magic and battle tactics. The father looks at Esto and asks him the same question, and the kid replies that he's going to bury himself in books about elemental magic. Then it's Van's turn. Everyone stops to hear what the 2-year-old is going to say. Van, as calm as a Buddhist monk, comes out with this. "Look, Dad, since I'm new here and there's a lot I don't know, I was thinking of starting with the basics, general knowledge and the history of our nation, to understand the geopolitical landscape." Man, the silence at the table was so intense. You could hear the server processing the information. His dad just gives a little smirk, starts laughing out loud, and says the kid's a genius. He was worried he was spoiling the youngest too much, but now he's convinced Van is gonna be a beast at fire magic, just like him and the boy's late mother. Expectations for the aptitude exam at 8 years old shot through the roof. Time goes by and Van starts to figure out how things work in this world. Here, if you don't have some badass offensive magic, you're basically just a background NPC. The nobles only care about the 4 classic elements: fire, water, wind, and earth. If you spawn with anything else, society looks at you like you're a glitch in the system. The Fertile family is all about combat elements, so Van knows that if he doesn't come with a flamethrower built into his soul, his dad is gonna kick him out of the family. To get ready, he becomes Till's best friend and starts grilling the poor girl about everything. He finds out that the ocean is ruled by monsters that would make the Kraken look like a goldfish in a tank. That's why there's only one safe harbor. He learns that the world is a real RPG with elves, dwarves, and other races, but the other maids kill his vibe by saying he's too young to know about these complicated things. But Van doesn't give up. He wants to know about the magical tools. Till explains that there are crystals and stones that store mana and that people create items based on their aptitude. But his fun comes to an end when the house's butler, an old man named Sparta, shows up with a stack of books that looks more like the entire library of Alexandria. Sparta is that kind of veteran who served the kingdom for decades and looks like the type who eats nails for breakfast. He decides to test Van with a simple math problem. If I raise 3 fingers here and 2 there, how much is that? Van, wanting to get it over with, answers 5 with a bored look on his face. That was his mistake. Sparta saw that the kid was different and decided, I'm gonna be your personal tutor and we're gonna turn that brain into a war machine. From then on, Van lived through a pedagogical hell. It was studying from sunrise until the moon came out. Within weeks, he was already reading and writing better than a lot of adults. 2 years of this, man? Imagine the burnout of a 4-year-old kid. At 4 years old, Van was already alternating between books and wooden sword fencing. He tried to hit Tell, but the maid was super quick, dodging everything and laughing in his face. When he finally fell to the ground, she celebrated like she'd just won the World Cup. But the head governess didn't like this goofing around and wanted to punish Till for disrespecting the nobility. The other maids were already ready to watch the drama unfold, but Van, with that kind-hearted Japanese spirit, just flicked Tim on the forehead and said, "There, you're punished." Now what's he? He didn't care for all that strictness. He just wanted to train so he wouldn't be a noob when danger came. And the training paid off. By the age of 5, the kid was already sparring with the royal guards. The secret? His experience from his past life. He could read movements, he had strategy. The people in the village were already calling him a prodigy, but Van stayed humble, talking to everyone no matter their social status. One day, while he was catching his breath, G's shown up. This guy is the deputy commander of the cavalry and has a sharp eye. He notices that Van's hands are way too soft for someone who trains that much. He realizes that Van is being overloaded with studies by Sparta and decides to step in. "Kid, you've got talent with the sword. I'm gonna convince the Marquis to let you train with me so you can become the greatest swordsman in this kingdom." Van feels torn. He likes the sword, but he knows Sparta won't give up on the books that easily. He ends up accepting G's training, thinking it would be easy for a kid. What a sweet illusion. Jid was a real taskmaster. He made Van do 100 cuts of each type with a heavy sword until the kid's arm almost fell off. Van would finish the day exhausted, but deep down, he was loving it. For the first time, he felt like he was truly living, overcoming physical challenges he'd never face in an office in Japan. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows. At 6 years old, Van decides he needs a day off so he doesn't totally lose it. He goes to the market with Till and 2 guards, Arv and Law. The place is packed. There's a ton of energy, shops everywhere. But the mood shifts when he sees a guy dragging a skinny, sickly boy by a rope. Van stops everything. He asks the guy what's going on. And the dude answers that the boy is his son and he's gonna sell the kid as a slave to make some cash. Van is in shock. Till explains that in extreme poverty, this is common. Before Van can have a fit from anger, Rosalie shows up, a representative from the Marie Chamber of Commerce. She recognizes Van and starts sucking up to him. Van points at the boy and asks the price. Rosalie says that since the kid only has aptitude for thief magic, he's not even worth 3 silver coins. The boy's father goes crazy, starts kicking his own son on the ground, saying he's a useless piece of trash. Van can't stand to see that cruelty. He interrupts the guy and says, "I'll buy him. I'll pay 5 silver coins right now." The guy grabs the money and runs off without even looking back. Van cuts the ropes and tells the boy, whose name is Kasim, that he's free. But Kasim has nowhere to go. The guards warn that the Marquis would never let a random commoner into the mansion unless he was officially Van's slave. Van apologizes for the technical term, but Kasim accepts right away. He'd rather be the slave of a decent guy like Van than die on the streets. Rosalie formalizes the slavery contract, holding both their hands to seal the pact. A mark appears on the back of Kasim's hand, and she explains that this is the seal of the contract. As long as it isn't annulled, the bond remains. Since it's her first time doing business with them, she doesn't even charge the contract fee. Van thanks her, and Rosalie is shocked because she's never seen a noble say thank you to her before. Some time passes, and Kasim is already at the mansion working for Van in a new uniform and looking way better than the day they first met. One day, Kasim lets him know that the deputy commander, Uncle D, is looking for him, but Van pulls a hide-and-seek master move. He offers Kasim a cookie and asks him to say he hasn't seen anyone. Kasim happily accepts the bribe, but warns him that Uncle probably already knows he's there. Van ignores that, but notices that Kasim isn't wearing his gloves, and the kid explains that he likes to show the mark because it symbolizes the bond between them. But Van reminds him that he bought the gloves for the boy to wear, so Kasim quickly puts them back on. He leaves the room and tries to fool his uncle, saying Van isn't there, but his uncle isn't dumb and says he saw him go in there earlier. Kasim, full of confidence, says his uncle is having hallucinations caused by the excess love he feels for Van. The uncle almost believes him, but then he sees cookie crumbs on the kid's mouth and immediately realizes he's been bribed. He decides that since Van is hiding, he'll train Kasim in his place. The uncle drags the boy away without letting him complain, and Vaughn, hiding, just silently asks for forgiveness, knowing that Kasim is about to suffer through his uncle's hardcore training mode. When Vaughn finally turns 8, the whole kingdom gets hyped to find out what his magical aptitude will be. Everyone expects him to have fire or wind magic, since that's the Fertile family's trademark. But at the time of the exam, Raupa, his father, totally freaks out when he finds out that Vanan doesn't have an aptitude for any of the 4 basic elements. To make things worse, he ended up with production magic, known as the unluckiest class of all. Basically, he can create swords and accessories by visualizing the item in his mind. But since you can make those things without magic, people think it's a useless ability. His father asks how he's supposed to protect people with that, and Vaughn is left speechless. Raupa says that his mother, Mura, was a fierce fire mage, and he can't understand how a craft mage was born. Since he's the last child Mura left before she died, his father sees this as a deep insult. Raupa draws his sword, says he was a fool to have hope just because Vaughn was talented for his age, and gets ready to wipe out his own son right then and there. But then Mercia, his brother, steps in front to save Vaughn. He calmly suggests that they give Vaughn a remote, forgotten village for him to govern. It's a place with about 100 inhabitants, no industry, surrounded by powerful monsters, and right next to the rival kingdom. In other words, it's a godforsaken place that's only good for military training. Raupa thinks it over for a bit and agrees, figuring it's a good way to use trash to mark territory. He tells Vaughn to leave as soon as he's ready, but before that, he praises Mercia for finding a use for this trash. Ouch, that one hurt. Mercia kneels down afterward and apologizes for the impulsive plan, but Vaughn thanks him, knowing he would have been a goner if his brother hadn't stepped in. Vaughn starts packing his bags with Kasim and even gets a little excited. He thinks, I'm gonna be the lord of a rural village. I'm gonna have so much free time to just take it easy. He loads up the carriage, but they don't let him take royal knights, only 10 adventurers that Mercia hired. He thought he was just gonna take Kasim, which would have been terrible, but out of nowhere his aunt comes running and says she's his personal lady-in-waiting and is coming along. Jin tags along too, saying he's gonna teach him fencing. And Harvey and Lau join the team too. Even Sparta joins in, saying he's retired and will supervise Vaughn's studies just for the fun of it in his old age. Vaughn isn't thrilled about having so many people, but there's nothing he can do. They try to leave the kingdom in secret, as ordered by his father, but Harvey and Lau manage to spread the gossip anyway. The result? The whole town comes out to give Vaughn an epic send-off, telling him to take care and come back soon. Vaughn is super happy and thanks everyone. On the way, he tries out his production magic and turns a stick into a little sword. His uncle lets them know they're almost there, and Vaughn tries to give Kasim an option. If he hates the place, he can go back to the mansion and be free. But Kasim comes out with that whole eternal loyalty speech. He says he's already decided to dedicate his life to Vaughn and will stay by his side forever, no matter the danger. Vaughn even asks, a little nervous, if that was a marriage proposal because the kid was so intense. Before things get any weirder, the carriage suddenly stops. The knights warn them that the village is under attack. Vaughn gets out of the carriage for an emergency meeting. Vaughn surveys the field and sees that the situation is tense. The bandits number about 50 men, while he only has a few knights in the group of adventurers. His uncle, our badass commander, immediately asks for permission to rush in. Boss, if we attack together right now, we can totally take these guys down. But Ortel, the leader of the adventurers, puts a stop to that. He says it's way too risky, that the numbers are crazy, and that as an adventurer, he knows this is going to lead to casualties. And he doesn't want to see his buddies get killed over a contract that was supposed to be just an escort job. The uncle tries to appeal to their emotions, saying this is Vaughn's first territory, and they need to protect their new citizens. Ortel admits that the speech is nice, worthy of an anime knight, but he keeps it real. This has nothing to do with us, we're mercenaries. The uncle gets frustrated, but at least asks them to protect Vaughn while he and the knights take their chances, letting them run if things get out of hand. Sparta, the mage butler, shuts the plan down at one point. He says that if the uncle dies, the village has no future. And then he reveals his hidden skill. He's a respected elemental mage. The plan changes. Sparta will create a defensive wall, and the adventurers will provide support from a distance. When the enemy focuses on them, the uncle will flank to deliver the finishing blow. Vaughn gets worried, saying that Sparta will end up dying if he acts as bait. But the old man insists on wanting to show his strength one last time. Vaughn, acting like a true leader, forbids it. You've already done so much for my family, you're not gonna die here. If I lose my strategist, Sparta, and my best fighter, Uncle, my dad will erase me from his life no matter what. So Vaughn decides to be the bait. His uncle and Kasim try to stop him, but Vaughn reassures everyone. He says he wants Kasim to be free and enjoy life, and that there's no better ending for an old man than to die for his people. Ortel is shocked by the kid's determination and remembers when he himself said that there was no such thing as a good noble. He remembers Vaughn coming in quietly, thanking the adventurers and treating them like veteran heroes. Right then, Ortel realizes that Vaughn's different. He decides, alright, let's trust our lives to this kid. Pluriel, another adventurer, agrees, saying that Vaughn was the only noble who bothered to memorize their names. Sparta organizes the strategy, a defensive wall raised in seconds. The old man gets romped, knights on the left and adventurers on the right. Ortel runs into battle thinking that if this boy survives, he has the potential to be the next king. The bandits, focused on dividing up the village, didn't even see the attack coming. The uncle clears the area with his sword and the bandits start rage-quitting out of fear. But the leader of the bandits, who isn't dumb, jumps over the wall to attack from the rear. He almost catches Pluriel by surprise, but Vaughn shows up out of nowhere, attacks the guy's legs, and immobilizes the villain. Kasim shows up right after and finishes the job. Pluriel is stunned. Who the heck is this 8-year-old kid who fights like that? Total victory, 0 losses for Vaughn's team, and guaranteed loot. Ortel, now curious, decides to stay in the village a little longer without even charging for his services, just to see what happens in this place. Pluriel and the other 3 stay as well, grateful to have had their lives saved by the little lord. Sparta lets them know the villagers are at the door, and Vaughn walks in with his chin held high. The village chief, an old man named Honda, thanks them but vents. We've been attacked constantly since we moved to your father's domain, because here no one protects us since we're poor and don't pay taxes. Vaughn listens to everything calmly, knowing the complaints are fair, but he's ready to change the game. The villagers were already in that mood of, oh great, here comes another noble with fancy words. And one of them even says that someone in Vaughn's position shouldn't talk like that. But Vaughn goes, hold on there, young man, and reminds them that the conversation is about the future of this land. He admits that the founders of the kingdom, the Bulhenet, left behind some pretty messed up laws, but that they can't just change the constitution of the land right now. But he's got a master plan with 3 steps. First, produce something so valuable that the kingdom can't ignore the village's loot. Second, generate steady money to hire elite mercenaries. And third, level up the village on their own. A woman from the crowd keeps it real. Talking's easy, I want to see you actually do it. Vaughn realizes that their confidence in him is at rock bottom, but then Sparta jumps in to give him some moral support. He says he was the head butler for Marquise Fertil and that Vuitton has been considered a prodigy since level 1. His uncle, or Jen, also introduces himself as the sub-commander of the order and says he's there to serve the young lord. The villagers are like, whoa, his team is really something. But the excitement dies down when Honda asks if he uses elemental magic, and Vaughn admits that his build is production magic. The sparkle in the villagers' eyes disappears instantly until someone asks about taxes. Vaughn drops the good news. He's gonna reduce the tax from 30% to just 10% of the harvest. Now that's when everyone really got hyped. To kick things off, Vaughn wants to reinforce security. Sparta raises a wall of earth in seconds, but warns that if his mana runs out, the wall will just turn into a pile of sand. So Vaughn decides he'll replace it with something sturdier later on. He also orders a moat to be dug to slow down the raiders, and his uncle takes on the task with the knights to set up traps and pits. After that, Vaughn heads to the woods to test out his crafting magic. He grabs some logs and feels that warmth in his stomach, his mana rising to the max. He manipulates the wood fibers like threads and creates blocks of mana fiber, an ultra-resistant material. His uncle and Kasim are totally confused, but Ortol, the adventurer, tries to break a block with his sword and nothing happens, not even a scratch. The guy says he hit it hard enough to cut stone, but the wooden block tanked it all. Vaughn realizes his magic is seriously OP. He spends the whole day crafting. Kasim mentions he heard that production magic uses up a lot of mana, but Vaughn is there, going strong, even making a thin and elegant sword. He gives the sword to Kasim as a gift, and Kasim is super happy. His aunt is all excited, hoping for a gift too, but Vaughn hands her a terrifying axe. Poor thing, her disappointment was instant. He's already thinking about making a cute accessory to make up for the blunder later. At night, Vaughn's body is completely wiped out. They're camping out, and he feels like he already smells like a pig, desperately needing a bath. So he decides he's gonna craft a house. The next day, Honda shows him a plot of land that used to be the public square, and Vaughn decides that's where the Lord's mansion will be. He starts the architecture, sets the pillars deep into the ground, builds the walls, floor, and roof. In a matter of seconds, the kid turns into an architect, civil engineer, foreman, and interior decorator. He does everything by himself. In our world, he'd have the power of a legendary small-town builder who does everything with faith and a Lord's prayer. The house was finished in a snap of the fingers and left everyone, villagers and adventurers alike, completely stunned. Vaughn even thinks he might have gone overboard with the size, but realizes that his magic is the ultimate tool to upgrade that land. After laying it all out and building that insane mansion, Vaughn tells it like it is. His production magic is way more of a game changer for a feudal lord than just playing around with the 4 elements. The kid thinks the elements are absolutely fascinating, of course, but he strongly emphasizes the idea that defensive and utility magic is what actually keeps people safe and lets them live in peace. Kamim and Kamim agree, but Sparta keeps it real. In times of war, the focus would be different. But for anyone looking to level up in life, Vaughn is the master of planning. G joins the conversation and fully backs him up. After all, the kid literally built a house from scratch. Knowing that Vaughn isn't your average player, Jin accepts the offer to get a new house if they bring in some wood. And he doesn't waste any time. He immediately gets his squad to start farming wood. Then, the village elder quietly shows up and asks if Vaughn could help them out too, because everyone's houses are falling apart. Any little bit of rain floods everything and turns it into chaos. And you can see it for yourself. The houses were practically begging for mercy. Vaughn wants to help, but he knows that spawning that many houses at once will drain all his mana. Even so, seeing how bad things are, he decides to start by redoing the village streets, which ends up leaving everyone homeless for a bit. But the people are loyal and help out with the process, because they know Vaughn is the guy with the foolproof plan. And so Vaughn goes on happily, using his production magic to give the village a real makeover. Zaylee is super proud, showing off how the place went from looking like a horror movie set to becoming a fancy neighborhood. Vaughn's mana reserves leave everyone stunned, not to mention his top-tier architect's sense of style. He explains that he used a grid design, grouping 4 houses per block and making the main streets look like an organized network. On top of that, he made everything exactly the same so no one would get jealous or create social inequality on the server. For now, it's all temporary, but he promises that once he gets his hands on some quality stones, he'll customize each family's house. And that's not all. He built some public bathrooms next to the mansion, which made the ladies super happy. Vaughn, on the other hand, just wanted a place to wash off the grime, since in his past life, he was a huge fan of a relaxing bath. He even had Pluriel fill everything up with water magic and came and heat things up with firewood. In short, traditional spa activated. Everything was super chill until Zaylee and Pluriel invited the kid to take a bath with them. Vaughn, who's no fool, plays the "I'm already a little man" card and turns him down. While the two of them are relaxing, Pluriel comments on how Vaughn is different for giving all this luxury to the villagers, being such an out-of-the-ordinary noble. Zaylee, who's his #1 fan, jumps in and starts hyping Van up, saying that since he was 2 years old, he was already the king of fencing and studying. She spent ages talking Pluriel's ear off with Van's entire backstory. Poor elf, she got an unsolicited audiobook. At night, Vaughn is there, taking his sacred shower when Kameen shows up, checks out his physique, and asks if he's been training hard. Vian can hardly believe it, because next to Jen, he looks like a stick. He explains that G is the exception to the rule, and anyone looks skinny next to that tank. Kamen swears he's gonna train until he's as jacked as Jin, but Varan begs him not to do that. Suddenly, G and his crew show up. Vaughn tries to teleport out of there, but G grabs him and forces the protagonist to hang out with the guys. After that forced hangout, Vaughn finally goes back to his room and passes out on the bed from exhaustion. The next day, it's time for supervision. Kamen announces that the knights have finished the moat. Basan likes the news and suggests filling it with water so it can be used as a reservoir for drinking and bathing. They ask Sparta for help, who uses magic to divert the course of a nearby river while Kamen and the crew were digging manually. Vaughn finishes the job by reinforcing the floor and walls with magic. The kid gets all emotional, seeing the teamwork, thinking this is how people make progress. He thought it would take a week to finish everything, but then in the afternoon, the workers announced that the river is already reaching the village. Vaughn is shocked by how fast the guys worked, but decides to call it a day. Jis still tries to convince him to keep going, saying they could finish everything in just a few more hours, but Vaughn looks at Cam and the others, who are completely wiped out, and asks for mercy. G agrees to stop, but keeps muttering that he thought he finally found a new kind of training. Yeah, for that monster, hard labor was just a warm-up. Vaughn is stunned by G and Sparta's endless stamina. Sparta also seemed disappointed they couldn't keep working. Two legendary workaholics. The next day, they finally reach the main point of the river. Vaughn gathers the squad of knights to thank them for their effort, knowing the guys went through a lot in the process. He gives the order and Sparta breaks the wall, letting the water flow. There's applause everywhere. The water reaches the village and the villagers are in shock, witnessing the miracle happen. When Vaughn gets there, he notices the water level is high and could overflow if it rains. So he comes up with the brilliant idea to create a lake behind the village as a reservoir. Sparta thinks it's a big brain idea, since this prevents any droughts in the future. With the lake ready, Kamen comments that now the village has a guaranteed water supply and no one needs to worry anymore. The elder almost cries with gratitude, because now he doesn't have to walk for miles to fetch a bucket of water. Vaughn, all humble, says the pleasure is his and now everyone can live peacefully. Meanwhile, the the scene shifts to a blonde woman and a little girl named Ryouchi inside a carriage. Little Ryouchi wakes up, and the blonde woman gives her a gentle head rub. The girl calls her a panorama, but gets a light scolding, because the lady is single and demands respect. Panorama says there's still a long way to go before they reach the border village and tells the little one to rest a bit more. Back with Van, we see that the upgrades just keep coming. He reinforced the village wall, even put up a gate and everything. What used to be just a dirt wall is now pure magical concrete. He explains that he mixed earth and stone with his powers, and now no bandit is going to be able to take down the village with such an overpowered defense like this. But Van is cautious, right? For him, a tall wall still isn't enough. The kid just went ahead and installed ballistae on top of the walls, complete with front shields so people can shoot without getting turned into Swiss cheese. Tilly is basically the surprised Pikachu meme. She can't believe that Van's production magic can turn any rundown village into a fortified city. Dee told it like it is. The way things are, that's not a village anymore, it's a small fortress. No bandit is going to have the guts to try their luck there, because their fate would be to get turned into mush. Then Dee dropped a thought-provoking question. Imagine if Van's father, that Lord Raupa guy, had known about his son's potential before kicking the kid out. With Van as the advisor, that Marquisate would be maxed out. Sparta tried to make excuses, saying his dad only cared about offensive power, but Dee couldn't hold back. Van's magic isn't just for defense, it's a power that can solo anyone if used right. Sparta kept his stance, saying Van is more of a defensive support type than a map rusher. Van himself cut the conversation short, saying there's no use crying over spilled milk or wasted talent. He's just gonna do what needs to be done. Dee laughed, but Sparta poked him. Are you planning a rebellion against your family? Before any epic comeback, Van's stomach growls and kills the tense mood. Priorities, right? After Tilly prepared that feast, Sparta brought up the problems of adult life, the village's economy. Business there is sad. Only one merchant comes by each month. Van said that for now, he can handle the lack of materials and food is taken care of, but Sparta threw cold water on that. There aren't any ingredients for the sweets Van likes. That's when the panic set in. Van immediately started brainstorming about opening a business in the village. Kamen suggested selling ores and Tilly suggested hunting animals, but nothing stuck because it either depended only on Van or only on the knight. So we headed into the woods. Sarah is outraged because Tilly and Kamen treat the gifts Van gave them like sacred relics, afraid to even get them dirty. Van gave them a gentle scolding, but they came back with the classic excuse, "It's a family treasure, master." Van was touched by their affection, but reminded them that if they don't use the items, they won't be able to defend themselves from the mobs. Then Sarah pulls out a shield he swore was indestructible and asks Kamen to give it a hit. Kamen, feeling really bad about it, gives the shield a little tap and bam, Sarah's shield literally fell to pieces. The chubby guy started crying because he hadn't even gotten to use the item yet. Van, being the fastest support on the server, used his magic and made the shield look even newer than when it came out of the store. Out of nowhere, Dee shows up with a sparkle in his eyes and asks if Van can buy some ores they found. Turns out that forest near the Wolfbrook Mountains is a spawn point for dangerous monsters, so nobody's ever mined there. The result? There's iron, copper, silver, gold, and even mithril just lying around on the ground. Van was left speechless. Dee explained that people avoid the place because it's hard to get to and full of monsters, but that the mountain range is probably a gold mine, literally. Van picked up some iron and, with a snap of his fingers, turned the raw ore into a perfect cube. Sarah, seeing that, jumped right in. "Master, can you make me some swords?" Van accepted the challenge and forged a short sword and a long one, both crafted with care, compressing the metal until the edge was razor sharp. Sarah almost had a heart attack from excitement, and the rest of the squad started lining up and fighting to see who would be next. Pluriel, who has an eye for business, pointed out that those swords were worth a fortune. But then the mood got tense. Sparta saw the mithril and raised the alarm, finding that in the forest means there's a dungeon nearby. If that's true, the village is going to fill up with people, adventurers, and the guild will want to set up a base there. Van got suspicious. He still doesn't have the infrastructure to handle all those people, and worse, the neighboring country might try to invade to steal the loot. Pluriel asked if his family's army wouldn't come to protect them, but Van was honest. To Sferteo, he's just a burden. If they find out the place is valuable, they'll kick Van out and take everything. The solution? Pluriel suggested only revealing the dungeon once the village is already rich and powerful, so Sferteo can't interfere. Van gave the order, no one is to go near the dungeon area. Back in the village, the peaceful atmosphere didn't last long. A villager came running in, panicking and shouting that a stampede of armored lizards was heading their way. Van immediately switched to commander mode, raised the bridge and closed the gates now. The villagers were in shock, but Van gave them that classic shonen protagonist speech. He understands their fear, but no one is going to fight alone. If they want to protect their home, they need to join hands and fight together. The kid's determination is on another level. The whole village was convinced. Everyone's on board with the plan. Van thanks everyone for their support and tells everyone to run to the walls and get into defensive positions. And people rush out at full speed to get into position. At that moment, Kamin shows up with the gossip. Reira's group took off from home and isn't even in the village anymore. Knowing this, Van decides to go to the front himself, but Tilly grabs his arm without saying a word. But her tears said it all. You know how it is. Then G comes over asking what's going on. Van, being polite, asks if G could go up to the top and report what's happening while he gives the orders down here. G accepts the call and takes off running. From up high, he spots the enemy crew coming. Quickly, Van asks, "So how many armored lizards are in the area?" G replies that there are about 40. And look, each one is at least 8 meters of pure venom. Aga gets a real scare, but a kid keeps thinking to himself that not even a squad of veteran knights could tank a beast like that. He keeps wondering what kind of wild strategy Van is gonna pull out of his hat. Then our little protagonist gives the order, load the ballistae with iron arrows. Jay accepts the order, but one of the subordinates immediately raises the alarm. Boss, regular weapons can't pierce that heavy scaled skin of theirs. Knight Jay knows that, but the guy has survived plenty of battles that seemed like sure losses. And today he decided to trust young Master B's command blindly. With the voice of someone in charge, he orders everyone to load the ballistae with iron arrows. The villagers load everything up in an instant. Without waiting another second, Jay gives the signal to fire. When the arrows hit the lizards, it almost looks like they just disappeared into thin air. Or so it seemed, right? Because in reality, they went through the monsters like butter, taking out 10 lizards on the spot. The villagers start celebrating like crazy while Jay is still in shock at the damage. But now things have gone south. There's only one iron arrow left per ballista, and since the monsters keep coming in berserker mode, the only option is to reload with whatever they've got and fire again. The arrows wipe out the second wave, but there are still more coming and they have no idea what to do. That's when Van remembers something. He orders them to use the wooden arrows. Even though some redhead over there said those wouldn't even pierce paper, Jay decides to trust young B, because so far the kid has exceeded all expectations. He protected the village and gave the place an insane upgrade, so Jay is sticking with them till the end. They load the ballistas with wooden arrows, fire, and believe it or not, the arrows go straight into the monsters' heads. Third wave eliminated successfully. Everyone's jaws are on the floor and they're over the moon. And Jay already announces that tonight there'll be grilled lizard skewers for everyone. Now with their confidence through the roof, they reload and finish cleaning up the rest. Jay shouts that the victory is ours and the crowd erupts in celebration. Even Van breathes a sigh of relief that the plan worked. And the fact that they won without anyone getting hurt leaves Jay speechless, assuring that Van is going to go further than anyone can imagine. After that, they start farming the items: scales, hide, and meat. Ordo even thinks it's way too much lizard and that the meat will end up rotting before they can cook it all. But Van comes over all excited about the amount of loot, suggesting they throw a meat festival to celebrate this epic victory. The whole village eats and drinks, everyone happy, sharing food and laughter. All thanks to Papa Van. A villager comments to the old man that he's never seen a noble laugh and have fun with common folk like this before. Esparta comments that Van's behavior is kinda questionable for a noble, but the kid has a charm you just can't explain. While Van was stuffing his face, Hera reveals that he figured out the plan. The arrows were made from the same material as the weapons Van made for him. At that moment, Jay was passing by, overheard the conversation, and got super jealous because Van made weapons for the adventurers but not for him. Hera's team even starts showing off how light and sharp the weapons are, saying they're really good looking. Then Jay's team can't take it anymore and begs Van to make weapons for them too, willing to pay whatever it takes. Van, of course, doesn't want to charge his buddies, but he asks them to get the materials. Later, when things have calmed down, he mentions that they could sell the meat for a ton of money, but since a lot of it would spoil along the way, considering transportation and everything, they'd each end up with about 8 coins. But he does the math quickly. Since they defeated 40 lizards, that would be about 300 gold coins, which in Japan, his previous world, would be over 300 million yen. That's a lot of money. He was already celebrating the profit, but Esparta throws cold water on him and reminds him that the law says if a village earns more than 100 coins, half goes to the marquis as tax. Van asks if they can't keep it a secret, but Esparta says it's impossible to hide that much gold. That gets our protagonist a bit down, especially because of the risk of being sent even farther away if his father finds out what's going on in the village. Then Esparta says that while it's hard to hide, it's not impossible. He suggests giving the credit to Van's older brother, Mercia. Van gets the idea. Mercia gets the credit he needs and nobody gets hurt. The next day, the merchants arrive in the village and are totally confused. They wonder if this place is really the border village because it's so well put together. Then, our young protagonist shows up, introducing himself as the lord of the area and asks them to identify themselves. The guys are Bell, the older one, and Rango, the younger one, from the Mary Company. Van lets them in, and when they get to the warehouse, the merchants nearly fall over when they see so much armored lizard loot. Van asks if they're gonna buy it, and Bell says yes, that he'll gather the crew, but that transportation will take a month. Van's cool with it, and he even offers them the meat for free if they'll check out the quality of his weapons. When the guys look at the swords, they're blown away by the craftsmanship. They say they'll pay whatever Van wants, and the kid takes the chance to ask them to spread the word about his weapons. The brothers hesitate for a moment, but Van quickly realizes their plan is to monopolize the sales. He lays it out straight. If the only two merchants on the route sell the same weapons at the same time, everyone will figure out where they're coming from. Basically, he called them fools, but did it politely. He suggests it's better to just announce the source right away and set up a system where everyone earns more the more they sell. Bell asks how to do that, and Van decides to open a shop right in the village. The brothers are super happy about the opportunity. Without wasting any time, Van suggests they start building right away. And within minutes, there's already a building finished. The merchants are stunned watching that magic happen right in front of them, especially since Bell had just described what the ideal shop would look like. Meanwhile, not far from there, there's a silver-haired girl and a blonde at the entrance to the village. The blonde says, with complete confidence, that she's gonna check if these rumors about the prodigy boy are true. We go back to Van's office. While he was planning the village layout and the wall defenses with Espada, a soldier interrupts to announce that an emissary from the neighboring county, Ferdinand, has arrived. Van tells him to come in, and there we see the blonde accompanied by the little girl. Van introduces himself as the lord of the area, and the blonde introduces herself as Panamera Harlequin, who has just become a viscountess. She got promoted through sheer determination and talent. The girl is Harut Ferdinand, the count's daughter. Van thanks them for visiting his humble village and invites them to sit down. Panamera comments that Van is even younger than Harut, but he has a commanding presence. She asks if he has any idea why they're there. Van replies that it's probably to assess the people and earn their trust. Panamera bursts out laughing because he hit the nail on the head. She explains that the Count is suspicious and fears that Van is being used by the Marquis, although he also suspects that Van was kicked out of his house for not having the 4 elements. Van confirms the secret, but says the rest of the concerns are fake because his father just said goodbye and kicked him out for real. Panamera doesn't really buy that story because the village turned into a modern construction site in no time, and she figured it would take 5,000 subordinates to build all that and turn the place into a military base. Van goes silent for a second, but then starts laughing, saying things were getting way too serious and uncomfortable. He explains the misunderstanding. His father only let him take Kanchan and whatever else he could carry. He left without even saying goodbye, but the rest of the crew came along because they wanted to. Jay cuts in, saying he followed Van because of his sword skills, and even though he was ordered to go back, he stayed. Esparta says he's already old, but he wanted to keep teaching Van, so he retired just to come live here. Tio says that Van treats everyone the same and that she wants to serve him forever. That leaves Panamera and Harut speechless. Even so, Panamera asks how the village changed so much. To explain, Van takes him outside. Sparta raises a wall of earth, and Panamera is impressed that the butler is an elite mage, but Sparta warns that the wall will fall when the mana runs out. That's when Van steps in. He turns the wall into something solid and creates a door in seconds using construction cubes. Panamera is completely shocked. Harut asks what kind of magic he has, while the blonde is still trying to process what she just saw. Van replies that he has the most useless magic in the world, production magic. When she hears this, little Harut remembers her own past. Van goes on to say that he was kicked out as soon as they discovered his power, and that his father has no idea of its real potential. Panamera thinks that's absurd, because with that power, the Marquis could rule everything. Changing the subject, she reveals that she was sent to check out the possibility of an engagement between the two of them. Van realizes it's to avoid war, but clarifies that he just wants to prosper and doesn't want trouble with anyone, so there's no need for a forced engagement. Panamera admits that she was against the arrangement, thinking Harut would be unhappy with the exile. But after seeing how he treats the people and the extent of his power, she changed her mind. She even says that she herself would apply if she were his age. Look at the blonde trying to jump the fence. Van takes it as a compliment and is happy. Panamera asks Harut what she thought, but the girl is still unsure. Van supports her, saying that he's also too young to be thinking about that and that it's better to take things slow. Panamera agrees and says they'll sleep there to wait for the final answer. Van is startled and Panamera laughs, saying it's the first time he's acted like the child he is. She tells Harut that they can stay at Van's house, but the girl gets super nervous, saying she can't sleep in a man's room. Van says there's no guest room, but that he'll make one in no time. A few minutes later, they're looking at an entire inn that Van created out of nowhere. At night, they have dinner together and Van asks Harut if she liked the food. She says it's delicious and they start talking about what she likes. She talks about pretty things, flowers, and dolls. Van asks to see them one day and she agrees, saying she brought some in the wagon. This conversation leaves Harut completely enchanted. Uncle and Kanchan also want to see the dolls, which makes everyone happy. After dinner, Panamera goes to sleep and leaves the kids alone. Van asks if everything's okay and Harut, gathering her courage, thanks him for everything. She was terrified of being forced to marry, but felt at ease when she saw he was kind. Blushing with embarrassment, she runs off and says goodbye. Back with the crew, Sparta comments that if they sent Harut to get engaged, maybe she doesn't have magical aptitude either. Van totally gets the struggle, knowing what it's like to be kicked out of your own home. He makes it clear that he wants to respect her wishes. If she can't go back home, she can live in the village without having to get married. And if she wants to go back, they'll help her out. At the inn, Panamera welcomes Harut and asks if she confessed her feelings, but the girl, blushing, denies it. Panamera decides to stay a few more days, and Harut loves the idea. Before going to sleep, the little one plans to strike up a conversation with Van tomorrow, super anxious. The guy barely woke up, still wiping the sleep from his eyes, and everyone's already on his case to rush over to Lake Van. Yeah, the one he just created. Apparently, Sparta and G are already there, waiting for him and getting bored. Our protagonist, who may not be dumb but is definitely slow on the uptake, still hasn't figured out why everyone's so desperate and even asked, why the hell did they put my name on the lake? Let's be honest, Lake B is a pretty lame name, but the locals wanted to immortalize what the guy did, you know? In fact, they've already decided that the village will be called Village B. The protagonist was caught between feeling proud and totally embarrassed, but alright. When they get there, the lake is more crowded than a new console pre-sale. G points to the middle of the water and check out this craziness. There's a little head floating. Relax, this isn't a horror movie or a crime show, so nobody actually kicked the bucket. According to Sparta, that's an Apkaloo, a human-fish hybrid, like an elite merman. Legend has it they only show up in paradise like rivers deep in the wild, but for some reason, this one spawned in their lake. It's a super rare mob that almost never shows up. Knowing that, our human starts yelling to see if the creature needs any help, but the thing just stays silent. He asks its name and gets nothing. Then he thought, dang, the signal's bad, she can't understand me. He told his uncle to bring some quality meat, because, let's face it, the best way to make friends and get a charisma buff is with food. And wouldn't you know it, it worked. The little creature came closer, all curious, looked at the meat with x-ray vision, and asked if she could eat it. The protagonist gave her the green light. She dug in and noticed it tasted different. Van explained that it was armored lizard meat, and if she wanted, tomorrow there could even be some shark. The girl was stunned. Who's the badass that took down those lizards? The protagonist tried to play it humble, but Sparta and G already spilled the beans. It was Van. The whole village chimed in. The protagonist still tried to say it was a team effort, but the girl just went, oh, and took off. Van was left there looking dumbfounded, thinking she wouldn't be back anytime soon since her kind is rarer than a legendary boss drop. But the plot twist came the very next day. Not only did the girl come back, she brought her whole guild with her. Van was totally confused, but then he remembered the question about the lizards. He thought, what if those lizards were like gods to them and now I'm marked for death? Sparta had never heard of anything like that, but the mood got tense. That's when the girl's dad, the leader of the tribe, asked to have a word with Van. G and Khan immediately went into combat mode because the guy looked pretty intimidating, but the truth is he just wanted to thank them for taking care of his daughter. He heard that Van used his special move on the lizards, and Van, all awkward, admitted, yeah, it happens, right? That put the whole tribe on high alert, thinking Van was some kind of mage with cheat powers turned on. Van tried to play it humble again, but the tribe chief went straight to the point. He called the protagonist a hero and said he had his blessing to marry his daughter, the one from Priora. Van almost dropped his jaw to the floor, and the man immediately asked if he had any complaints. The father-in-law introduced himself as the Beast Guy and said that Priora was his only daughter and that in the future she'd be a waifu worthy of respect. Van told it like it is. Hey man, she's just a kid. She doesn't even know what a marriage contract is. On top of that, he wanted to know why everyone was so desperate. The Beast Guy explained that their people used to live peacefully, but then the armored lizards invaded their territory and a lot of folks became just memories. That's why he wanted a strong son-in-law to make sure everyone could live in peace. Van realized the plan was a political alliance through marriage, but he pushed back. He said there was no need to get married to protect anyone and that it was better to let the girl decide when she grew up. The old man was a bit offended by the rejection, but Van assured him he would protect them no matter what. The Beast Guy accepted the deal and decided to live by the lake. The protagonist, who's a master at building stuff, immediately spawned some luxurious cabins for them to live in. The people thought it was black magic, but Van explained it was just a lounge for them to relax in. The tribe started enjoying the good life, but Esparta reminded everyone it was time to do some maintenance on the sewage system. The Beast Guy thought it was weird, and Van explained that he had installed a piping system to keep the village hygienic, otherwise the smell would get unbearable. Since the Apocalypse are the kings of water, the Beast Guy offered their labor, since they're diving specialists. Van loved the efficiency buff. Conscience showed the work, and the Beast Guy decided that the tribe would take care of it every day as payment for the rent. In the middle of all this, Panamera and Arut show up and are shocked by the fishmen. The Beast Guy kept calling Van his dear son-in-law, and Arut almost had a meltdown, while Panamera looked at the protagonist with that "you're disgusting, you Lulu" face. Van tried to explain, but Priora showed up confirming that he was her hubby. The confusion was set. The next day, Van tried to clear things up with Arut, and Panamera helped by explaining that it was all just a misunderstanding. They hung out there enjoying the lake breeze, and Arut was impressed by how amazing Van was for having created all of that from scratch. But the peace didn't last long, because Priora showed up again, calling him an orphan. She was all happy until she saw Arut and immediately said, "Who's that over there?" The mood got tense, and to make things worse, a bunch of kids showed up to play with the meat guy. In the middle of the chaos, they rocked the boat so much that Arut fell right into Van's arms. Total silence. The kids thought it was hilarious, but Priora was absolutely furious. Van tried to say again that there was no engagement, and the girl stormed off, fuming with anger. As revenge, the kids started trolling Van for hurting their friend. Getting out of the water, the Beast came up to Van with that final boss aura. He said that Van already had his daughter and was still flirting with someone else. Arut freaked out, thinking he was talking about her. Van tried to explain himself, but the Beast laid down the condition, a duel against the clan. If Van won, the marriage would be made official. Yeah, the father-in-law's logic is something else. Dee, wanting to watch the chaos unfold, accepted the challenge on Van's behalf, and Esparta agreed just to settle the mess quickly and get back to studying. Panamera thought it was interesting, but Van was panicking because if he lost, he'd have to get married out of the blue. The Beast decided it would be best 2 out of 3. The first round was Van's choice, water volleyball. He even made some bikinis for Panamera and Dee, who, by the way, loved the look. Panamera went in focused, wanting to win to make sure Van would end up with a rude. But Priora and the Beast were really quick. They totally crushed Tio's team at the start. Tio started crying, but the single Warrior Girls team got motivated and managed to tie the game. But at the deciding point, Van's team bit the dust and lost. The second round was the Beast's choice, relay swimming. Total advantage for the fish people, right? Van started to panic, but Dee and Conscience stepped up to handle it. Conscience struggled, but managed to catch up to Priora. In the end, Dee swam butterfly style, which is how he trains, and totally crushed it with his speed, winning the race. There was just one little detail. His bikini fell off halfway through, but the victory was secured. The tiebreaker was up to Van to choose, a shaved ice duel. The guy built a machine, used magic, and added flavorings. It was gonna be a team ice eating contest. Van teamed up with Arut, even though she was feeling unsure. The competition was intense. Brain freeze hit everyone hard. Van almost gave up, but when he saw Arut giving it her all, he went into berserker mode and ate every last flake. Victory for the protagonist's team. Van thought he was off the hook, but the beast, being all noble, said he liked his son-in-law even more now and that he was the perfect guy for his daughter. In other words, winning didn't help at all. The mess continues. In the end, Van ended up with a stomach ache from all that ice, but everyone was happy. Arut started reflecting on how everyone there was so close and cheerful, something she never had in her noble family, where she was treated like a failure for being weak and having puppet magic, which nobles think is evil. She remembered how she was promised in marriage at 10 years old, but meeting Van changed her perspective, since he also has a type of magic considered inferior, yet does legendary things with it. She decided that she's gonna work hard to see the same horizon as him. Time passed, and Van got back to focusing on upgrading the village wall. He motivated the workers with the promise of an epic barbecue the next day. Panamera thought his informal way was funny. And Arut showed up all excited, trying to fit in more. Van noticed that her energy was through the roof. She asked to see the work, and he let her, of course. But the peaceful vibe might be numbered, because it looks like the local adventurers aren't gonna give him a break. Van's new walls are on a whole other level. We're talking about something that would leave any general speechless. And our protagonist, as always, keeps that humble attitude, like he just built a little sandcastle. He says they only finished everything in a record 2 weeks because everyone gave it their all. Panamera steps in, all imposing, and reminds them that she also helped with the logistics, but even she admits the speed and perfection of the work were unreal. While she's talking, Van is more distracted by noticing that Panamera's walls, if you know what I mean, are also pretty eye-catching. But he's smart enough to keep that comment locked away in the back of his mind. He stays focused on business and mentions that if the population grows and merchants and adventurers start showing up, he'll fill that space with new houses. Panamera lets out a sigh and confesses that having her own domain has always been her life's dream, and she hasn't given up on it at all. Who knows, maybe in the next war she'll score some points with the king and get some land to call her own. But changing the subject, she points to the top of the walls and asks what those strange spikes are. Van grins with pride and explains that they're ballistae. Basically, he took the simple design he had made before and gave it a serious upgrade. Now the system is double and fires twice in a row. While the women try to process the engineering, Van asks Kanchan to do a practical demonstration. The kid climbs up there, fires a shot all casual-like, and the damage to the landscape is massive. For Van, that's about what he expected, but for anyone watching, it looks like he just invented heavy artillery out of nowhere. Panamera nearly falls over when she realizes that Van didn't just set up 1 or 2, but there are more than 100 of these spread out along the entire length of the wall. Seeing that the thing really works and that he turned the village into an impenetrable fortress, she comes right out with it. She wants to buy several and says she'll pay whatever price he asks. Van, with that lordly politeness, says he's sorry but they're not for sale. She insists, won't take no for an answer, and suggests a trade. He gives her a ballista, and now she owes him a huge favor in the future. The protagonist agrees, already grinning like someone who knows he's gonna collect on that favor with interest and late fees later. Since the contraption is way too heavy, she'll have to set up a whole transportation scheme. And about the arrows, since they seem to be made of regular iron, she decides to make them herself back at her own little fort. But then Kanchan shows up out of nowhere and suggests she at least take an original one made by Master Van to use as a template. She doesn't get why all the secrecy until he pulls out the katana to show her something. Being a warrior who's seen it all on the battlefield, Panamera looks at that sword and thinks the design is weird, almost amateurish with that strange curve. Kanchan then asks for one of her swords to test his durability. She lends him a spare, confidently saying that the blade is top quality and has been through 1,000 battles without even chipping. Kanchan doesn't hesitate and strikes with a sharp blow. She thinks he barely touched it, but when she looks at the ground, her sword has been split in half, like it was made of cardboard. She's completely shocked and asks what the hell that weapon is made of. And Van drops the bomb, "It's just regular iron, that's all." That's when she completely loses it. If the sword is like that, then the ballista bolts must be made from that souped up metal too. Van confirms this as if it's the most normal thing in the world, and even adds that they're strong enough to pierce through 2 or 3 huddled lizards at once. Her soul almost leaves her body, and she literally begs for a couple of arrows, please. On top of that, she even thanks Kanchan, because if it weren't for him, she would have underestimated the equipment and taken a serious loss in the first battle. The vibe in the village was actually pretty chill, but out of nowhere, the peace is shattered. The adventurers show up on the horizon running like there's no tomorrow. The warning is short, blunt, and desperate. Evacuate now, there's a giant dragon coming this way. The guys volunteer to act as bait, trying to draw the monster's attention to buy time for the village to escape, which is basically a death sentence. Van knows he needs to intercept the creature right there, but he's terrified that some villager might get hurt in the crossfire. That's when Panamera steps in to provide that tactical and moral support. The plan is simple and straightforward. The ballistae are gonna roar. She takes command of her men and warns them that the creature is a mid-level forest dragon. It doesn't breathe fire, which is a relief, but it's still a flying killing machine. Vaughn, always very considerate, apologizes profusely to Ryouchi for the scare and the danger, but assures her with a determined look that even against a dragon, there's no way they're gonna lose. He tells his uncle and Ryouchi to hide in the safest place in the village and calls everyone to join the fight. Meanwhile, the adventurers are rushing toward the wall, driven by sheer terror and adrenaline, praying they don't get the gate slammed in their faces. Vaughn realizes that the biggest problem is if the dragon decides to ignore the walls and just fly right over the village. So the top priority order is focus on the wings. In the middle of all that chaos, one of the adventurers ends up tripping and falling behind. Sarah tries to help by throwing a dagger to distract the monster, but it backfires and she ends up becoming the main course in the dragon's sights. The group leader, in a brutally honest way that's almost comical, tells the others to run and leave Sarah behind because he knows he's the only one fast enough to survive that life-or-death chase. The dragon starts dodging the ballista arrows with annoying ease, showing that it's not just brute strength, there's intelligence there too. Vaughn starts sweating bullets, but Panamera isn't there just to hang around. She prepares a high-level elemental spell, focusing all her energy, and shows why she's respected throughout the kingdom. With a supercharged fire javelin, she slams the dragon into the ground with an impact that makes the earth shake. The problem is, this beast is a biological war tank and gets up, shaking off the dust like it just got slapped. At that moment, Vaughn realizes that fighting armored lizards was just the tutorial, and now the game just got real. The dragon takes flight again, the ballistae fire once more, and by pure miracle and precision, this time they hit its wings dead on, forcing the beast to fight on the ground, where the odds are a little better. Even wounded, the monster is way too fast, dodging the second round of shots like it knows exactly where each arrow will land. The adventurers, now safely behind the walls, thank all the gods they're still breathing. And Sarah swears she's never getting herself into something like this again. Panamera decides she needs to buy more time for her grandpa to get organized and uses fire magic again. The dragon tries to dodge, but she shows she's got total control over the spell, guiding the attack through the air until it hits dead on. Vaughn is in a state of shock. That's the pinnacle of fire magic, something only a handful of humans can pull off. She can take on the beast by herself and hold her own, but she says she's going ahead to get the final defense ready inside. The dragon, its wings thoroughly scorched and furious with rage, climbs the wall and positions itself at the top, looking like a god of destruction. It's at this critical moment that Espada, the butler everyone thought only served tea, calmly decides to walk toward the beast. Vaughn panics at the old man's craziness, but Espada just wants to do his job. He uses an incredibly powerful earth spell to bury the dragon under tons of rubble and announces that now is the perfect time to make a run for it. Vaughn begs the old man to run faster, even promising him that super expensive red wine he loves so much. And the butler, complaining that his bones aren't what they used to be, decides to sprint like an athlete. Hansen stays behind to provide some last-minute cover while Vaughn runs off to lead the final resistance in the heart of the village. When Vaughn finally gets to the combat position, Panamera already has the whole team ready. He says he's gonna call in that ballista favor right now. She needs to immobilize the dragon with magic again, so the ballistas have a fixed target to finish the job. She accepts the challenge right away, amused by the irony that her strongest magic is only being used to hold the beast in place so Vaughn can shine. In return, Vaughn promises a dragon meat feast for everyone who survives. When the monster wakes up from the rubble and comes drooling with rage, the villagers get ready with whatever they've got. D charges in, facing the dragon head-on with his new special iron weapon, while his companions do whatever they can to distract the beast. Espada buys him a little more time with the beast, and when they finally manage to create an opening, Panamera unleashes a burst of flames right in the creature's face. With the dragon stunned by the heat and the light, the ballista finally fire everything they've got in storage. All the arrows hit at once. The monster falls, writhing in agony, but still tries to let out one last roar of defiance. D, with zero patience for drama, settles things by decapitating the beast with a clean strike. A total and absolute victory. The whole village erupts into an indescribable state of euphoria. Ryouchi and her aunt come out of hiding and run in for a hug. Relieved, Panamera wipes the sweat from her forehead and praises Vaughn's steady leadership during the chaos. He tries to play it modest, saying it was a close call, but she immediately corrects him. Most fortified cities would have been wiped off the map in minutes by a monster like that. What they pulled off there was a historic feat, worthy of being mentioned in the history books. Vaughn says all the credit goes to his friends and subordinates, but Panamera zeroes in on just how technically impressive those ballista are. Piercing through dragon scales like they were paper is something that defies logic. Vaughn, already thinking ahead, starts mulling over how to improve the design to fire 10 arrows at once, but for now, he accepts that it's time to celebrate. Panamera suggests an official ceremony and says the title of Dragon Slayer should rightfully go to D, since he landed the final blow. In his official speech to everyone, Vaughn praises the courage of each person who stayed and fought, then hands the floor to Panamera, who, as a Viscountess, carries the weight of authority. She makes it very clear to the people that this dragon wasn't just any creature, it was a nightmare that used to level fortress strongholds. The fact that the village survived without losing a single human life, sacrificing only a section of the wall and 2 ballistas, is practically a divine miracle. She names the great heroes of the journey. D for his unmatched brute strength, Espada for his exceptional support magic, and of course Vaughn for his strategy, initiative, and the courage to lead the actions. The people go absolutely wild, shouting the little lord's name. Panamera watches Vaughn from afar and
She thinks about how he's different from all the selfish nobles she's ever met in her life. She remembers her own difficult journey, how she trained almost to the point of death since she was 16 to become a commander, and how every title she holds was earned with blood and sweat. She ends up revealing the real reason she's there. Count Ferdinando wanted to marry off his youngest daughter, Arut, to the lord of this remote land just to get rid of her. Panamera had come there on a secret mission to check out the kid, and if he turned out to be an idiot or a tyrant, she would take the girl back home right away, dealing with whoever she had to. But seeing how Van turned that isolated place into a high-tech oasis, and his kindness toward Arut, she realized he was a rare ally in a world of intrigue. Right there, she declares a formal alliance with Van. She knows the kingdom failed to help the village, but promises that with this union between the Cayenne family and Van, no one will fear the Count again. Van realizes this alliance is his ticket to grow, gain protection, and turn the village into an economic hub. He accepts the handshake with a smile on his face, sealing what promises to be the beginning of a new and grand era for his domain. The young lord, who was abandoned by his father, now has the support of one of the most powerful in the kingdom, and the sky's the limit.
We pick up our journey right after that insane fight against the forest dragon. Van, our protagonist, who was kicked out of his noble family for having a skill considered useless, proved that it's anything but trash and took down the giant flying lizard. He's there chatting with Esparta, the veteran knight who's basically his right-hand man. Van is being all humble, saying he's super happy they managed to tank the giant dragon, but Esparta replies, with genuine respect, like a loyal subordinate. We're only alive because you built those stone walls that are basically a real defense hack. If it weren't for those indestructible walls you pulled out of nowhere with your production magic, the city would have been turned into mush and we'd all be in the afterlife right now. It's that classic recognition from someone who knows the support is the one who really carries the game, right? Taking advantage of the high spirits after the victory, Esparta drops the bomb about urban planning. He tells Van that since the defense system, the walls, are top-notch, now it's time to focus on the internal Sim City. The plan is to turn that cluster of houses into an elite, organized, and massive place. Van, who never backs down from a building challenge, confirms that the deal is on. He wants to renovate everything so the city can handle no less than 10,000 people. That's right, the kid wants to turn a ghost village into a packed server metropolis. But then Esparta brings up the logical point. All right, boss, we can build the houses, but where are we gonna find that many players to live here? Van is there racking his brain trying to figure out how to attract immigrants to the middle of nowhere when suddenly the maid shows up with the gossip of the day. The merchants who showed up before are back, and they're drooling over the dragon loot. These merchants are your typical opportunistic RPG NPCs. They saw that Van took down a legendary creature and came running to try to buy the materials. Van thinks, dang, if I sell these scales and teeth, I'm gonna make a ridiculous amount of gold to invest in City Hall. The merchants start examining the forest dragon's remains and are shocked because the pieces are flawless, in the kind of condition you'd expect from a freshly dropped legendary item. They start whispering that all that is worth 100 platinum coins. Van, who's sharp, does the mental conversion right away. In the real world, that would be about 10 billion yen. That's enough money to buy the whole kingdom if he's not careful. But that's when the merchants start getting sneaky. The guys come up to Van, bold as brass, and say, look, the stuff's pretty nice, but we'll only pay 60. Van can smell a scam from a mile away. He says he needs to consult his assistants before signing the contract. The merchants start to panic and try to manipulate the kid. Don't listen to them. Your assistants are newbies. They don't know anything about the international market like we do. One of the merchants, the cockiest one, even goes over to intimidate Van's staff, reminding them that they're part of the Merry Chamber of Commerce and that no one else would dare come out to this godforsaken place to buy anything. The guy basically said, either you sell it to me cheap or you'll be stuck with that dragon junk rotten here because I'll ruin your reputation at the guild. Van listens to all of this with that look of someone just waiting for the right moment to ban someone from the chat. Van's assistants, who are actually honorable merchants, a rare thing in this anime, say they'd rather stay loyal to Van than go along with this shady business. But then the villains threaten. If you don't convince Van to sell for 60, the guildmaster will kick you out, and you'll never even be able to sell a healing potion on the street corner again. When the merchants step out to give Van some time to decide, Van asks his assistants if the threat was for real. They confirm that the guild has huge political power and that yes, they could actually be banned from the commercial network. Then Van has a genius idea. What if you guys start your own company and tell those guys to get lost? The assistants are totally shocked. To open your own company in that world, there's a ridiculous amount of grinding involved. First, you have to pay the guild fees, which are expensive. Second, you need a huge amount of starting capital for infrastructure. And the third, which is the final boss of bureaucracy, is getting an official endorsement from a high-ranking noble of the royal family. Van looks at his stash of platinum and realizes he can take care of the first two requirements with a snap of his fingers. But what about the noble? Who would vouch for an exiled 8-year-old kid? That's where our favorite knight, Panamera, comes in. Van goes to have a chat with her because he knows she has connections in high society. Panamera, with her blunt honesty, explains that she herself started a company not long ago, but her situation's pretty sad. She's a noble, but she's more broke than a third-rate rice seller. She has no land, no army, and no money. She needs a heroic deed for people to start respecting her name. Van suggests, what if we say you were the one who killed the dragon? But Panamera is clear-headed. If I lie and the king investigates, he'll find out it was you, and then my reputation is gone, and I'll become a meme throughout the whole kingdom. The solution she offers is for Van to stop hiding. She explains that he needs a noble title of his own. Since he's the son of a marquis, he's entitled to start out as a baron. Van is hesitant, terrified that his family will find out he's gotten strong and want to bring him back to use as a political tool. But Panamera gives him a reality check. Dude, you killed a forest dragon as a kid. That's in sulfur monosulfide level achievement. Take advantage of this hype and go get your baron title already. If any enemies or jealous people show up wanting your position, we'll just crush them in a fight. She's the type who solves everything with PvP, a true battle maniac. And Van actually gets a little scared of her energy. Panamera asks if Van won't be upset that she's stealing a bit of the spotlight, but she makes it clear she's there to support, not to take advantage. With the plan set, Van goes back to the shady merchants. He tells them that now his assistants have the support of nobility, Panamera, and that they're going to open their own shop. The scammer merchants are left speechless. With no way out, they end up agreeing to pay the fair price of 130 platinum coins for the dragon loot because they know they've lost exclusivity. But to get revenge, the other merchants run off with the carriages, leaving Van's assistants stranded in the middle of nowhere with tons of dragon materials. Don't worry, says Van, switching on creative builder mode. He creates a carriage from scratch with an aerodynamic and sturdy design, using his production magic. To complete the combo, Panamera lends her personal warhorse, a beast so strong it looks like it came straight out of a nightmare. While the villainous merchants are up ahead laughing and thinking they've left Van stranded, they look in the rearview mirror and see a cloud of dust. Van's carriage speeds past them in a crazy drift, going faster than a Formula 1 car. The guys are left totally confused. How is that pony running so fast? What kind of speed hack is this? Up to the capital. Panamera arrives before the king. Everyone thinks she's going to ask for a raise or a medal, but she surprises him by requesting a noble title for a certain young man. The king, who isn't dumb at all, asks, what did this kid do to deserve to be a baron? She drops the bomb. He governs an isolated village and killed a forest dragon all by himself. The silence in the hall was deafening. The king asks if he's a genius at elemental magic or a prodigy swordsman, and Panamera delivers the punchline, no, your majesty. He uses production magic. When she reveals that the prodigy is Marquet Vert's son, Arvan, and that he's 8 years old, the king nearly has a heart attack. She tells the whole story of Van, how he arrived in a devastated land, wiped out the bandits, built impenetrable defenses, and took down the region's greatest threat without suffering a single casualty. To top it all off, she shows the physical proof, a giant dragon tooth. The king is fascinated and says he really wants to meet this little engineering monster. Panamera leaves with the official document and immediately starts shouting to the whole city, Van is a baron now, spread the word. The gossip spreads faster than wildfire, and everyone starts wondering who this legendary kid is. Back in the village, Van is now officially Baron Van. He doesn't waste any time and starts expanding the royal city. He builds super tall watchtowers to monitor any threats, making sure there's zero fog of war in the area. After so much work, he gets as hungry as a lion. The maid suggests having a snack at the top of the tower to enjoy the view. They go up there and admire the progress. The city is turning out beautiful, organized, and safe. Esperda even suggests changing the name of the place, since Van's Village sounds like the name of a kid's Minecraft server. Van feels a bit offended, but deep down he knows the place has become something much bigger. The cherry on top is when the maid serves some fancy sweets. Van asks where the sugar and rare ingredients came from, and she explains that the new shop run by the assistants, the ones Van helped, is already up and running and importing luxury food. The city is starting to have its own economy, guys. That's capitalism working in the Isekai. But the fun is cut short when a group of ragged people shows up at the gate. Van and Esperda go check it out and discover that they're former residents of the place, from Siaso, the original name before Van arrived. These people tell a sad story. They fled because the old lord's taxes were abusive and there were no jobs. But now, after hearing rumors that an optimistic lord turned the place into a paradise, they've decided to come back. Van notices that there are only elderly people and women, so he asks about the young people, and the answer is heartbreaking. The royalty took all the young people to serve as cannon fodder in the wars. Van, who's the kind of hero we respect, doesn't think twice and welcomes everyone. How many of you are there? We have 300 people coming, sir. Van grins from ear to ear. 300 more citizens for his kingdom. He's already planning to build high-quality houses for each family. The refugees say they have nothing to offer except their cows. And Van almost bursts with joy. Cows mean milk, cheese, butter, and of course, a good steak. He sends armed escorts to safely bring the rest of the people. When the 300 new residents arrive, Van throws the biggest party that land has ever seen. Barbecue for everyone, the maid's cake for all, and a promise of decent jobs in the shops and with the city's expansion. The residents cry with emotion, thanking the young baron for giving them a second chance. The city of Siaso is officially the strongest fortress, and Van is just getting started building his empire. Van was there, happy as can be, but on his first attempt to sneak away, Esparta popped up out of nowhere to say it was time to study. Luckily, Van was saved by the Bell, or rather by Orzo's group, who came back from the hunt just in time. But the crew showed up looking like someone died, apologizing to Van. The reason? In the middle of the hunt, they ended up finding the entrance to a dungeon. In other words, exactly what Van wanted to avoid so he wouldn't draw attention. Esparta, who never slacks off, immediately reminded everyone that the protocol is clear. They have to notify the capital right away. Van immediately realized that as soon as the news spreads, the city will be flooded with adventurers, and his father will end up finding out just how much that place has progressed. Orzo and the others were feeling bad, but Van just said, "It's done, nothing we can do now," and told them not to worry about it. He told Sarah that he would be the messenger, since he's the group's explorer, and technically the one who discovered the place. Sarah was kinda like, how does he know that? But Orzo suggested it would be better to go along. Van, however, wanted them to stay and patrol the area around the dungeon and offered a large gold coin as a reward. And since money talks louder than friendship, Orzo said goodbye to Sara and wished him a good trip. But Van, feeling a bit sorry for Sara, gave him a mithril sword. Orzo, seeing how shiny the weapon was, immediately wanted to switch places, but Sara had already left, all happy with his new toy. On the way to the capital, Sara was there, admiring his sword and thinking the trip was going to be a breeze. But out of nowhere, he runs into a group of orcs attacking a carriage. It was the perfect chance to test out his steel. He defeated everyone without even breaking a sweat. When the dust settled, a girl stepped out of the carriage to thank him, introducing herself as Flamilia. She asked his name, and Sara just said, "I'm just a lowly adventurer." But she totally didn't buy it. With moves like that, he had to be someone famous. Sara got all embarrassed. Flamilia said she was going to walk to the capital, but since they were headed the same way, Sara offered her a ride on his horse. She tried to refuse, but he wouldn't take no for an answer. He picked her up, got on the horse, and even flirted, saying the horse was much happier to carry her than him. She smiled, but then the mood got a little heavy. She said her father was a baron, but he died in battle, and their lands were taken. Now she was heading to the capital to try her luck as a servant in some noble house. Seeing that she was a good person, Sara suggested she go to Van's village, where she'd have a job and a chance to grow, promising that he himself would protect her. Flamilia thought about it for a bit and accepted the invitation. Meanwhile, Van was chatting with Esparta about founding a little village near the dungeon so adventurers would have somewhere to drop dead. Esparta agreed, but said they'd need a magistrate to keep things in order. Van immediately threw it back at him. "Don't you want to be my magistrate?" He accepted without a fuss, but reminded Van they'd also need a new order of knights. Van got the message, since the current order was responsible for the whole village. He even suggested calling it the Esparta Order of Knights, and Esparta immediately realized Van was just messing with him because they always put his name on everything. Sometime later, they were busy with preparations, gathering materials to build the settlement. Van noticed some villagers with an impressive physique and asked Dee what he thought about recruiting those folks for the order. Dee thought it was a fantastic idea, but when they went to talk to the people, it was a total letdown. They had already signed a contract to join Esparta's order. Van couldn't believe that damn Esparta had outsmarted him and secured the people first. At that moment, Khan announced that Sara had returned and was accompanied. Van asked about the girl, and Sara explained that they met by chance, and since she was lost, he brought her along. They asked if there was still room for another resident, and Van welcomed her right away. Flamilia told the story of how they met, and Van, who's no fool, immediately picked up on the vibe between them. Suddenly, a group that looked like bandits appeared, heading toward him. Van immediately froze, thinking it was the apocalypse, but Sara reassured him they were just adventurers looking for money, who basically followed him after the report. When they arrived, the guy started saying the place was dangerous and that they should go back to the village. But the way they talked sounded more like a threat than advice. Van was shocked because the guys looked like movie villains, but they were actually concerned. Kanchan explained that despite their scary looks, they had good hearts. But Flamilia blurted out that their faces were scary, and you could almost hear the poor guys' hearts breaking. They asked what the group was doing there instead of being in the village, and Van replied that they were basically already in the village. When the adventurers saw the wall, they couldn't believe that all of that was just a village. Van put on his usual little shell, showing how he built the wall, and the guys were left speechless. Then Dee showed up, greeting the young master, and the adventurers almost fell over when they realized that kid was the famous Nefertil everyone talked about in the capital. The adventurers showed up all cocky, but they really shouldn't have called Van a kid in front of Gil. The swordmaster didn't think twice and cut everyone's weapons in the blink of an eye. After that show of power, the tough guys changed their tune right away. Now it's all respect and military salutes every time they cross paths with Gil. While Gil is seen as a monster, Van still has that reputation as the poor kid who got kicked out of his house. But the mood changed when Orzo's group showed up, shocked by the new competition that had popped up in the village. They came back from exploring and seeing Sarah with someone immediately asked, "Who's the beauty?" Sarah introduced Flamilia and quickly slipped away to the inn. His group almost fell over backwards. No one could believe that Sarah had landed a girlfriend. Van, ever the visionary, immediately offered, "Take advantage of the fact that I'm here. I'll build a house for you two." Orzo asked if it was gonna be a love nest. And when Van confirmed, poor Orzo started cursing himself for selling out for a gold coin instead of delivering the message. In the middle of all this drama, Priel told Van that the entrance to the dungeon is about 3 hours from here, in a crazy, dangerous place near a cliff. Up until then, people could only set up some pretty lousy camps over there. She dropped a heavy hint, asking if Van couldn't build a sturdier house near the entrance. Van thought it was the height of audacity, since the forest is nothing but danger. But Priel insisted that they already knew the way, and that they'd protect him no matter what. Van tried to play hard to get so he wouldn't have to leave the construction of his village. He started demanding a bunch of things, thinking they'd give up. He wanted nap time, fancy desserts, and to bring his helpers, Tahi and Karum too. To top it off, he demanded to bring Harut and a battalion of guards, since Dill and Esparta had to stay working in the village. He was sure they'd back out, but Puriel agreed to everything with a smile on her face and told Orzo to figure out how to get all the little luxuries for the young master. Van had that look on his face like, what did I get myself into? A while later, there they were, on their way to the dungeon. Harut and Karim were totally suffering, while the girls were just enjoying the trip. The problem started when they got to the so-called cliff. Van almost had a fit when he saw that the bridge the adventurers used was just a tree trunk. He yelled at everyone, made them all kneel, and gave them a big lecture about workplace safety. When he saw Sarah happily jumping on the trunk, Van already warned, "If you keep it up, I'll kick the trunk." He explained that the basics are to build a proper bridge. But of course, Van doesn't know what basic means. He didn't just build a bridge, he put up a reinforced door so no monster could escape from the dungeon. And he built a base that, honestly, I thought would be small. But the guy made a 4-story building. The ground floor was for storage, the first floor was the cafeteria, the second was the dormitory, and there was even a terrace with an ocean view, or almost, and a rainwater collection system for the bathrooms. The adventurers were ecstatic. Van left Orzo in charge of everything and said he had to get going, otherwise Esparta would tear him apart for staying past the time limit. In the middle of the celebration, Harut caught sight of an ore, and when they checked it out, it turned out to be mithril. The party was in full swing. But the joy didn't last long. When they got back to the village, Van totally panicked. Esparta was there waiting, with that little smirk that meant he was about to give an epic scolding. Van begged Tahi and Harut for help, but nobody wanted to get caught in the crossfire. It was left to Orzo to try to step in, saying the delay was his fault. But Esparta told him to shut up and dragged Van away by the ear. The poor guy could only pray for his own life as he was taken to his final destination, study time. Van and Harut were strolling through the streets, enjoying that light-hearted vibe of seeing things get better day by day in the village, with everyone happy as can be. Van, curious, pointed out that she'd been around for quite a while and got straight to the point. Wasn't it time for her to choose what she wanted to do with her life? Not about marriage, but about what she truly wanted. Harut got all nervous and ended up confessing that actually she did want to marry him. Van was startled, but when he saw the girl all embarrassed, he pretended he hadn't heard anything, even though he was really happy about her confession. Shortly after, Belle and Ringo arrived in the village, letting everyone know that the company had been successfully established, just as planned. They handed over the 130 platinum coins. Van took the big sum and handed it over to his aunt to take care of, and she, poor thing, panicked just from holding all that fortune. Belle and Ringo also mentioned that Miss Panamera was coming back, since she thought it was better to ally herself with Van than to stay in Ferdinand's county, and she would probably want some land nearby. The guys also showed off a little gift they brought from the capital for Van, an automatic crossbow that fires 10 arrows at once. Van got excited, thinking this would be a huge upgrade for the ballista. Later, while studying the weapon, Van tried to make one himself, but it didn't turn out the way he wanted. Harut realized that even Van made mistakes and apologized, thinking she might have said something wrong, but he told her not to worry about it since he messed up all the time, and aside from magic, there wasn't anything special about him. Harut immediately disagreed, reminding him of his talent for studying and fencing, but Van countered by saying she could surpass him too if she had a grumpy teacher and a badass captain of the guard like he did. The girl laughed, and when Van asked about her magical affinity, her expression changed instantly. Her aunt stepped in, saying Van wasn't going to force her to talk, but Harut decided to open up. She had an affinity for puppet magic. Everyone was shocked, not understanding why she was so embarrassed, since just like Van's production magic, everyone thought it was something useless and frowned upon. But Van, wanting to cheer her up, asked if she could show them. Without wasting any time, he made a doll, and Harut started moving it with her magic. After a while, everyone was impressed and said the show was wonderful. Dino suggested that Van make a really beautiful doll for her to use with her magic, because the villagers would love the performance. Harut thought the idea was interesting, but she was afraid to show it, since she knew her magic was looked down upon. Van recalled that the same thing happened to him, and his own father used to call him a failure. But thanks to production magic, he was able to make a lot of people happy. He made it clear she could do the same thing too. Moved, Harut confessed that she had always felt worthless, but if he believed in her, she would give it her all. As night fell, the villagers gathered in the square, curious about the reason they had been called. Van got up on stage and thanked everyone for coming. Without beating around the bush, he announced that Harut would be putting on a show with her magic. People started murmuring, trying to guess what kind of power it was. And that's when Harut began. When they saw the doll moving, everyone started talking about the famous puppet magic, the one so hated by the nobles. Hearing that, Harut remembered her childhood traumas and froze with fear. Van, however, gave her the support she needed to keep going. Motivated, she gave it her all. The audience fell completely silent, mesmerized. Her aunt cried with emotion, and when the show ended, the crowd erupted in applause, praising that magic which until then had only been associated with criminals. Van went over to congratulate her, and Harut, bursting into tears, thanked him for everything. The next day, everyone was informed that a carriage bearing the royal emblem was on its way. Van and the boys went out to welcome the visitors, and there was Panamera. She immediately noticed the drastic change in Harut and asked what Van had done. He humbly said that they just got a little closer and he showed her the potential of her magic. Panamera joked that he was a charmer, but the mood shifted when the king appeared. Dino told Van that he would be officially made a baron, so he would have to bring benefits to the country. Besides that, the king knew about the dungeon and wanted an immediate investigation, warning that he wouldn't tolerate any lies. Van assured him that he would fulfill everything. Dino also mentioned the dragon, which was surprising. Aparta then explained that the case was so unusual that the king himself had to check it out. Van replied that it wasn't a problem, he just asked them to be patient and open-minded because it would be hard to believe, but he would do his best to prove it. Dino thought the idea was interesting, and without wasting any time, the group went on to take a general look around the village. Up at the top of the tower, Van showed them the arsenal. Aparta, a bit skeptical, commented that ballistae were useful against large targets, but he doubted they were that practical for everyday use. Van, unfazed by the skepticism, asked for a demonstration. He ordered the cannon to clear the forest, leaving the king and Aparta stunned. Destroying everything without needing mages or elite archers was quite an achievement. Then, curious, they asked about those star-shaped walls. Van explained the basics. Since they have multiple faces, you can attack from all sides. Dino and Aparta quickly realized that getting caught in a rain of arrows there would be a nightmare. Panamera even commented that it was the perfect defense, only thing left was to deal with aerial attacks. Van, calm as ever, replied that he already had some prototypes for that, but needed to test them on the battlefield. Aparta, suspicious, asked if he really made everything himself, and Van confirmed it as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Dino, always wary, warned that he didn't tolerate lies, but Van kept his composure. Panamera asked the king to trust them, and Aparta, still in disbelief, went to check out the village's structure, which should have taken years to build. Van, totally nailing it, said he did all that in about 4 to 6 months, of course with a little help from the crew. Dino and Aparta just couldn't buy that story, so Panamera suggested a practical demonstration. On the way to the lake, everyone in the village greeted Van, which left Aparta shocked at the closeness between a feudal lord and his subjects. He even asked if that was normal, and he and the king exchanged looks like, "What's going on here?" Along the way, they ran into the adventurers, who honestly looked more like bandits. The king got tense, but Van, totally chill, explained that they were his dungeon exploration buddies. When they got to the lake, everyone was genuinely shocked to see the Saurians, and to make things worse, their chief showed up calling Van his son-in-law. Van tried to clear up the misunderstanding, while Dino and Aperta were still trying to process that these were actually at Kalos. To really impress the king, Van asked the swordsman to make a wall of earth and then used his own magic to turn it into a sturdy fortress. Both of them were stunned, not even knowing what to ask next. Switching scenes, they went to check out the buildings Van had made for the Akalos. The structures were so unusual, you couldn't even tell if they were docks or houses. Van's mother-in-law, well, actually the chief of the Atkalos, showed up to greet Dino as a tribal leader, and the king introduced himself as the monarch of Bjorn. The atmosphere was one of complete respect, and the chief offered a gift as a symbol of alliance, a piece of orichalcum, the medal of the gods. That thing was worth a national treasure. While Dino and Aperta were discussing how valuable that relic was, Van, without thinking, turned the thing into a sword. The guy literally ruined the item's rarity right in front of him and then tried to hide it, but the damage was done. Dino, remembering the promise of zero lies, put Van on the spot. He knew how to forge swords. Van tried to play dumb, but Panamera gave him a hint to just tell the truth. Dino said he would pay the price for the truth, and Van asked for just one thing: the right to live in that village permanently and never be sent away. The king even felt bad, thinking Van would get VIP treatment in the capital, but the boy stood his ground. His mission was to protect those people and create a place where no one would be in need. Dino finally sighed and agreed. He realized the kid had grown up and couldn't be treated like a child anymore. On the way back to the village, Dino said he needed to head to the capital soon, so they would go straight to the dungeon. Van, keeping his confidence high, said the journey was too long and it wasn't worth going at night. It'd be better to leave it for another day. The king and his entourage laughed at his nerve, but before the conversation could go any further, the alarm sounded. A dragon was coming! Van didn't waste any time, organized the defense at lightning speed, and accepted Panamera's help. The scene ended with the enormous dragon flying over the village. Feel the tension. A colossal dragon decided to show up and attack the village with everything it had. The order was given right away for everyone to fall back and hide behind the catapult while they called for some backup from Panamera. And out of nowhere, my friend, another giant dragon, appeared, flying right over the village. The group quickly realizes that the gigantic beast is being controlled by a wizard. When the king has a word with his advisor, the guy tells it like it is. Those giant birds attack in packs. If there's one being controlled here, it means there's some serious trouble coming. The king immediately gets suspicious and starts suspecting the kingdom of Helenia. Van, poor guy, just can't figure out why on earth an entire nation would attack his peaceful village. Then the advisor explains that this flying beast is just their ward, a scout to check out the area, and that the elite knights are probably right behind it. The problem is that the wyvern dragon is flying way too high, out of reach of arrows and regular catapults. Van realizes there's no other way. He's gonna have to put his brand new catapult prototype, which he just invented, to the test. Meanwhile, it cuts to the forest. A troop of knights is marching, convinced that the wyvern will scout out the village in the blink of an eye and bring back a full report. The leader of the group, Prince Onimo, who's the second son of the kingdom of Helenia, is fuming with anger. The guy felt demoted for being assigned to invade a village in the middle of nowhere. One of the knights tries to calm things down, reminding him that the king gave him this mission because it's super strategic. So their plan is to take over all the little villages around, to farm territory, grow the empire, and later on go head-to-head with Escudia. But when they get to this so-called isolated village, reality hits them hard. They come face-to-face with a colossal wall, an insane fortress surrounding everything. The knights are left speechless, not understanding how such a remote place could have such heavy defenses. Prince Onimo, in his arrogance, immediately says that it's all just for show, that there's no way they've fortified the whole city, and orders the cavalry to attack. One of the guards even stammers, "But boss, what if the wall is real?" Onimo gives that classic dressing down, offended that anyone would doubt his abilities, and orders them to break everything down. The crew charges at the gate, eyes blazing. They hit it, try everything, and only manage to scratch the paint. That's when things get interesting. Van shows up at the top of the wall, giving them a sarcastic welcome and introducing himself as the ruler of the city. He throws out "So, what are you doing in my territory?" Prince Anemo is shocked to see that the boss of the place is just a kid, but what really blows his mind is that Varan knows they're from Helenia. When Anemo asks how he figured it out, Vaan just says it was just a lucky guess. The prince, annoyed, asks how he managed to build a wall like that so quickly. Vaan replies, cool as ever, that he just had the cooperation of the villagers. Anemo thinks he's being mocked, tells Vaan to come down so they can settle things, and even boasts that the wall won't withstand his wyvern's aerial attack. He orders the mage to give the attack command to the dragon immediately. A knight tries to warn that they might end up hitting their own dragon in the process, but Anemo calls the guy an idiot and insists the beast is invincible. He starts laughing in Vaan's face, telling him to watch the destruction that's about to happen. But then, my friends, Panamera steps onto the scene. She's there, set up with the catapult, and fires an insanely powerful arrow into the sky. That arrow splits apart, turning into a rain of projectiles that come tearing down on the dragon, taking the beast out instantly. Prince Anemo is left totally confused, with that look of someone who has no idea what just hit him. The secret? Vaan had fused those arrows with arrow stars, which he says is a super powerful piece of equipment. It was just a prototype, but it worked perfectly in practice. The king and the advisor are stunned. The advisor even comments that the power of that thing rivals a high-level elemental mage and could become a huge threat in the future. Things really start to go south for Anemo. He gets his second shock of the day when he realizes that the guy next to Vaan is none other than the king of Escudia himself. He just stands there, trying to process what the king is doing in a village like that. Vaan steps forward and casually asks, "So, are you gonna surrender or are we gonna keep going?" The knights don't even think twice and immediately raise their hands, but Anemo freaks out and orders them to protect him. Vaan realizes the prince doesn't want to give up, so Panamera fires a heavy arrow that barely misses him. She lays it out straight. Watch yourself, because the next one will go right through you. There was no other way. Anemo was forced to throw in the towel. The king is fascinated by Vaan's intelligence and can't understand how the Marquis was crazy enough to kick out such a talent. He even comments that when they get back to the kingdom, they'll have to rethink things and give the boy the recognition he deserves. Cut to Anemo, tied up and diseased. The advisor and Panamera show up together for an interrogation, wanting to know Helenia's plans. The guy plays tough and keeps his mouth shut. But Panamera doesn't have the patience for that. She goes straight for a creative threat. "So, would you rather I poke your eye out first or rip out your nails?" You can feel the tension in the air. Anemo realizes he messed with the wrong people, his courage goes down the drain, and he spills everything. He reveals that Helenia had been playing this for a long time. The main target was Emperor Verdo's territory, which they thought would be easy to conquer. The advisor asks if Vaan's village was the only target. And then comes the bombshell. Anemo says that at that very moment, the city of Escudia is also under attack. Everyone is in shock and they rush to warn the king. The advisor says they need to fly back to Escudia to prepare an army and hold off the attack. The king agrees, but asks Vaan to join them on this mission to help with the defense. The boy is surprised. Panamera teases him, asking if he's really gonna leave everyone hanging. Vasan tells it like it is. He really wants to help, but if he leaves his village in the middle of its development, it'll become an easy target and his dream will fall apart in a second. The advisor laughs and says, "Your city took down a wyvern with ease and made armored dragons run away." What do you mean, in development? Vaan answers, focused, that what they have now isn't even 10% of what he wants to build. Panamera thinks that's awesome, super curious to see what crazy thing he'll come up with in the future, and she's happy with his promise to protect the village, praising him for acting like a true noble. Feeling on top of the world, Vaan agrees to help defend Escudia, but with one condition. He'll train the soldiers his own way. The king agrees without hesitation. Vaan gathers his trusted crew. He appoints Espada as interim governor, saying he doesn't trust anyone else to hold things down in his absence. He decides to take D and the adventurers with him. But Tio, Arte, and Compson put their foot down, refuse to stay in the city, and insist on joining the fight. Vaan can't say no and adds him to the team. He's worried that people will think he's taking too few soldiers, but D reassures him. Relax, when they see our firepower, they'll realize we're worth a whole army. Then Bear and his friends show up, wanting to go along just as Vaughn's bodyguards. When Vaughn says he'll pay 7 gold coins for the job, the guys go wild with excitement and accept on the spot. Panamera says she's gonna take care of something first and then gather her knights to join them there. And Artie already says she's bringing her doll to the battle. Before leaving, Vaughn gathers the knights he chose to give them a heartfelt speech. He explains that the mission is to defend Escudia because if the wall there falls, their own city could be next. He keeps it real. He knows the enemy has more combat experience, but reminds everyone that they've got nothing to lose and that the main goal is for everyone to come back home alive and without a scratch. He promises to give his all to protect the team. Meanwhile, let's check in on the Marquis, Vaughn's father. He hears about the attack on Escudia and tells his assistant to send out a call for help to all the nearby cities. The assistant asks if they should call his son's city too. The Marquis scoffs, saying there aren't any soldiers there and the people live in poverty. The assistant pushes back, saying that merchants have reported the city is super strong and that Valan even defeated a forest dragon all by himself. The Marquis goes into denial and says that's impossible since the boy doesn't have any elemental magic. When the assistant tries to insist, the Marquis tells him to shut up and orders an immediate march to Escudia. The Marquis arrives at Escudia's south gate and the scene is devastating. Everything is destroyed. A swarm of Yelena's wyverns is there just waiting. When he tries to organize the troops, the mages riding the dragons start dropping bombs on him. The beasts get ready for a dive attack. Now you can really feel the emotional weight. The Marquis finds himself cornered and accepts that this is his end. But out of nowhere, all the wyverns change course and flee the area in a panic. Cut to the west gate. Check out what was going on. Arte's doll is flying through the air, fully equipped with armor forged by Vaughn, and she's taken down the wyverns like they're nothing. The soldiers have no idea what that bizarre doll clear in the sky is, but they get the order to provide support. Art is controlling everything from afar, right next to Vaughn. Vaughn is amazed by her piloting skills, but he feels sad seeing that a good part of the city has already been destroyed. Dee explains that defending was almost impossible because the attacks were coming from way up high. Yelena's soldiers quickly notice the movement and set their sights on Vaughn, Arte, and the rest of the team. They come at them with everything they've got, but Kimson doesn't let up and uses Vaughn's new arrow to sweep away the enemies, and Dee and Bear charge in as well. One of the wyverns tries to ambush Vaughn, but Arte's doll intercepts and takes care of the problem easily. Yelena's knights notice the threat and shift their focus, forgetting about the city and deciding to direct their entire attack at Vaughn and his team. And Van loves it, because the distraction gave the perfect amount of time for Escudia's soldiers to retreat and save themselves. The Marquis and his men barely manage to escape. At that moment, the king and the advisor arrive. Marquis throws himself to the ground in reverence, and when asked about Escudia, he delivers the bad news. The city has fallen. The advisor finds it odd that he's still alive, and the Marquis explains that the wyverns suddenly turned around and headed for the west gate out of nowhere. The king figures it out. They went after Vaughn. The Marquis nearly has a fit when he hears his son's name, and the king, all excited, starts listing the boy's achievements. Back in the forest, Vaughn is with his crew. Dee asks what the next step is. Vaughn says they've done what they could, but the fight for Escudia isn't over. Otherwise, the problem will end up falling on them. And then the boy's mind gets to work. He comes up with the idea to build a war wagon that launches heavy projectiles to help the front line. Arda throws cold water on the idea, saying it's too heavy and the roads are in terrible shape. But Vaughn flashes that confident smile and reveals the plan. He's gonna use his magic to manufacture the war vehicles right in the middle of the battlefield. And with that, he tells everyone to get ready for the next move. Continuing on this journey, the boys hit the road toward the nearest city to Escudero. Vaughn spent the whole trip in a bad mood, complaining that even though he knew it was necessary to bring the new weapons, It meant having to step onto a battlefield again, and all he wanted was peace and quiet. When they finally caught sight of the city, Vaughn noticed that from the outside, it looked like an ordinary, peaceful place. But the thing was, it was packed with soldiers everywhere. After the beating they took, the Escuderia army was using that city as a base to lick their wounds and try to reorganize the troops. Vaughn even commented that Eleneda's new weapon was the stuff of nightmares, but things really got tense when his father showed up out of nowhere. Vaughn stared at the old man with a look colder than ice. His father, all serious, said, "I heard you're a baron now, and even defeated a dragon." When Vaughn confirmed it was a forest dragon, the soldiers were all shocked. His father, not believing it, asked how the hell he managed to do that, since even he himself couldn't take down a beast like that alone. Vaughn, already running out of patience, said he used ballistae, but nobody believed him. After all, what ballista in the world could pierce those steel-like scales? Vaughn was about to give up explaining when Panamera showed up, asking if there was some kind of family meeting going on. Japal changed the subject right away, and she took the chance to say the king was eager to see Vaughn's inventions. The kid suggested showing the ballista to his dad after talking to the monarch, and Panamera loved the idea, already teasing Japal by asking if he wanted to see the arrows she bought from his son. But Vaughn shut that down. Now he had something way better to show. When they arrived at the throne, Vaughn was impressed by the respect the guards commanded. But Panamera, just to stir things up, said that if she were well equipped, she could beat both of them on her own. The guards were furious, but Vaughn realized she was just testing the waters. At the meeting, the atmosphere was tense. The plan was to take back Escudetto, and that's where Vaughn met Arucha's father, Count Variat. Ferdinand Aperta laid it out. What worried them most was that Yelenida had taken the city in the blink of an eye, something no one had managed in years. The reason? The wyverns and those explosive black spheres. If they didn't stop those creatures in the air, defeat was certain. Japal admitted that facing those things was terrifying, and Aperta tossed the question to Vaughn, asking if he had a strategy. The kid stood up and said it straight. Just take down the wyverns before they attack with the spheres. The other nobles started laughing, calling him a kid and saying he was talking nonsense, that if it were that easy, they wouldn't be struggling. But Aperta put everyone in their place, saying that if it were anyone else, he'd call it crazy, but since it was Vaughn, he believed him. Then Dino asked if Valian would be willing to lead the vanguard to retake the city. But then Vaughn shocked everyone. He said he had absolutely no intention of going to the front lines. The nobles almost had a heart attack at his boldness in answering the king like that. Dino tried to tempt him with glory and honors, but Vaughn stood his ground. He wanted to stay in the rear because he didn't want to get hurt. His father, fuming with anger, stood up and said he was crossing the line, that he was just the lord of a remote village and should know his place. Vaughn didn't back down and said he knew very well what his place was, and that those nobles had no idea what he'd been through to protect his people. He reminded them that he took over a village that was falling apart, that his companions were the only ones who supported him while his own family didn't give a single cent of help. He explained that if Yelenida attacked his village while he was away, he would lose everything. Aperta confirmed Vaughn's fear, warning that Yelenida had already sent scouts to the region, proving they wanted to wipe everything out. Vaughn made it clear that he wasn't going to let his village turn to ashes, and that's why he couldn't afford to get hurt. Variat even doubted that he could handle the enemy army alone, but Vaughn, with ridiculous confidence, confirmed that he could, yes. While the nobles were making all that noise arguing, Vaughn ignored the commotion and spoke directly to the one in charge. He wasn't going to just stand around in the rear, he was going to do things his own way. Continuing with the plan, Vaughn prepared brand new ballista and catapults and decided he was going to set everything up at once for everyone to see. His father even tried to give him a reality check, asking if he wasn't grasping how serious the situation was. But for him, every second was precious and there was no time to waste. With that usual smirk, Vaughn just replied that, as promised, he was going to show the power of the weapons in person. When he left the room and built everything at an unbelievable speed, the nobles were left completely baffled. How the hell did he do that? Van even asked his father what he thought, but the old man just scoffed, saying that even though they looked nice, they were probably useless, and walked off to reorganize the troops. Far from there, Vaughn got together with Dino and the rest of the crew to explain the trick up his sleeve. That new weapon launched special shurikens designed specifically for wyverns. He laid it out straight. Victory wasn't guaranteed, but he had prepared everything perfectly, and as long as the enemy didn't go off script, their chances of winning were high. Dino gave him props for a job well done and dismissed the other nobles so they could focus on the army. On the way out, Tio caught up with Vaughn and let him know that Aruch had shown up there too. Right then, the two of them saw Aruche greeting her father, looking all nervous. She asked about her mom, but Berea was cold with her. He said she was in her usual territory and cut the conversation short, saying he was super busy. Aruch accepted it, looking a bit down, and Vaughn, picking up on the mood, came over and suggested she get some rest, asking Tio to go with her. Later on, Vaughn joined Kanshin, Orzo, and Panamera to sort out the final details. He gave the order for Kanshin to lead the archers because the only way to take down the wyverns was with a combo of arrows and catapults. Kanshin promised to give it his all so he wouldn't let anyone down, while Orzo and Dee assured they'd be Vaughn's escort. Then Panamera laid it out. The moment of truth had arrived. The kingdom of Yeleneta had conquered the fortified city really easily using a new weapon, which showed that the era of the four elements magic was over. Dee even asked if Yelena was the top dog now, but Panamera wasn't so sure. For her, the real danger was what Vaughn was able to create. The next day, the operation to take back Escudado kicked off in full force. Joppa led the attack while Van rallied the crew, telling everyone that the #1 priority was to clear the skies of wyverns. On the other side, the Prince of Yeleneta showed up all full of himself, ready to face what he thought would be useless attacks. He ordered the archers to fire, and a rain of arrows fell. But Vaughn pulled off a strategy straight out of the movie 300, protecting everyone. He even got excited to see that the wooden shields he had thrown together in a rush were holding up. The prince, foaming with rage, ordered the mages to go all out. The shields were holding, but they wouldn't last forever. The Prince of Elenita was there, thinking he owned the place, but he got a shock when he felt the hit at the gate. When he looked out at the battlefield, there were Van's father, Berea, Joppel, Panamera, and the girl with green hair, whose name I always forget. They started a coordinated attack at the entrance, and with a combined strike from Van and Joppel, the gate was blown to pieces. Van was actually impressed by the strength of his father and Baria, and without wasting any time, the soldiers stormed into the city. All hell broke loose against Eleneta's army, and things got rough for the heroes for a moment. But Panamera mowed everyone down and told them to take advantage of the opening. Orzo's unit showed up to back up Joppel and the nobles, telling them to leave the cleanup to them, while the others pushed forward. The adventurers from Van's faction were crushing the enemy soldiers, and Japal even asked if they were the boys' subordinates, which Orzo proudly confirmed. Meanwhile, the Prince of Elenita was super frustrated, ordering the soldiers to go get that thing because he hadn't expected so much resistance. When the wyverns finally arrived, he thought the tide had turned, but Van gave the signal to Kansen. The catapults were activated and the ammo exploded in the air, wiping out almost the entire aerial unit. Only one wyvern was left alive, and it charged at the boys. They went into combat to distract the beast. That gave the others the perfect opportunity to use the ballista, while Panamera finished frying the creature with magic. To top it all off, JYA went over and chopped off the monster's head. With the enemy's main force wiped out, Panamera declared it was time to celebrate. Berea had to admit that Van's power was on another level. The Prince of Eleneta, seeing that it was all over, tried to make a run for it. After everything, Mercia asked his father if they were going to leave without saying goodbye to Van, and Joppel, reflecting on it, admitted that maybe he had been wrong about his son. In the end, everyone joined the party. Arut was beaming that everyone made it out of this in one piece. And right on time, Orzo and Sarah showed up with the enemy commander in tow for an interrogation. Panamera went right away to dig up the dirt and soon after brought back the heavy gossip. Elenita was already planning to attack on 3 different fronts. Frightened, Arut tells Van that she needs to hurry back to Ferdinand. And Van, who's no fool, immediately says, "I'll go with you." But Arut puts the brakes on his enthusiasms. She explains that she can't depend on him forever. Besides, it's a family mess that she has to handle herself. Even so, she apologizes right after, because she knows he's just worried. but she needed to put her foot down. Van, catching on to what's going on, understands her side. After all, if he, who's just the lord of a little border village, were to save Ferdinand County all by himself, the Count's reputation would go down the drain. He might even risk losing territory. With that in mind, Van agrees to stay, but sets one condition. She has to take an escort. Right away, Orzo, Sarah, and Puriel volunteer. They make it clear they'll do whatever it takes to protect their future boss. And since they're adventurers, their participation in the war doesn't turn into a diplomatic incident. Van thanks them and entrusts his fiance's safety to him. But then the mood changes completely. When they arrive in Ferdinand, the scene is pure destruction. Arut panics thinking about her mother, the one who always rejected her, and runs off like crazy to find her. But the shadow of the wyverns covers the sky and the bombing starts again. Orzo grabs her shoulder and says, "If we act now, we can still save the day." He asks to take command of the unit, but Arut refuses, insisting that the honor of repelling Elenetta should belong to the Count's family. Honestly, this girl's a bit out of touch with reality. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Arut's older sister is in shock, but their mother tells her to stay calm. Her plan? To make everything look like a heroic death at the last second. She wants her daughter to be remembered as a noble who died with honor, although for a moment she ends up thinking of Arut when she looks into her eldest daughter's eyes. Outside, Elenetta's soldiers are already celebrating the win, thinking Ferdinand can't last another round. Out of nowhere, the tables turn. The Silver Knight, controlled by Arut, starts slaughtering the enemies in an impressive bloodbath. The soldiers are left completely confused. Who is this crazy knight? When they look up at the hills, they spot Arut's leg. The enemy leader orders an attack while Arut feels the weight of responsibility. She knows she's not a genius like Van. She's shaken with fear and seriously lacking XP, but she's determined. She asks her allies to give her that clutch support so she can save her home. Orzo replies with, "Milady, your wish is my command." And Arut heads to the front lines. The Silver Knight sweeps across the battlefield. Puriel neutralizes the crowd with magic, and Sara takes the chance to finish everyone off. Orzo isn't far behind and shows he's got some muscle, though Sarah almost got sent to meet St. Peter thanks to some close calls. The Silver Knight saves her skin, but ends up losing an arm in the process. Even all banged up, the armor keeps fighting. The fight escalates, the damage is heavy, but the adventurers give it their all and manage to clear the area. The joy doesn't last long, because when they look up at the sky, the hype drops. A flock of Elenetta wyverns is coming their way. The enemy leader already had this ace up his sleeve to take down the Silver Knight. The beasts come at him with everything they've got, but Arut doesn't give up. When her armor is about to go down, a second one appears. Orzo is stunned. Arut is controlling two puppets at the same time. The problem is, that drains mana faster than an old phone battery. The enemy leader orders them to finish everything off quickly, but Arut is in full beast mode. As she clears the way, she remembers how she was always seen as a failure, and how her puppet magic was hated by the nobility. She had sworn never to use it in public again, but Van saved her and gave her confidence back. With her overwhelming power, she takes down the wyverns one by one. Arut had already cleared out half the sky when the enemy leader, desperate, sends the wyverns in for an all-or-nothing attack. But her determination is even greater. She uses that magic everyone looked down on to save her family and finally takes down the last beast. Seeing the massacre, what's left of the enemy army turns tail and runs, and our heroes celebrate their victory. Arut breathes a sigh of relief and is extremely grateful for the gifts Van gave her, apologizing to her friends for pushing everyone to their limits, but thankful for having saved her home. Meanwhile, at the mansion, Arut's mother is still trying to figure out who the angel was that saved her. Right at that moment, her husband arrives, relieved to see that they're both okay. Arut's mother asks Barrier if he has any clue who sent the reinforcements. Barriart says the only thing he knows is that two puppets made Elenetta's army run away, and that the one leading the group was a little girl with white hair. At that moment, it hits the wife and she starts crying, realizing that it was Arut who saved the day. Barriart even says it's ironic that she came back to help after being kicked out of the house, and admits they were cruel to her. Cruel is putting it mildly, right? They were downright miserable to the poor girl. With the drama in Ferdinand County over, Sarah asks Aruta if she's not going to stop by and see her parents, since they're so close by. But Arut, with a heavy heart, says that if she shows up, it'll just cause more trouble. Huriel and the others try to cheer her up, reminding her that it was her puppets that saved the county and that people would be thrilled to know the truth. But Arut still has that trauma, you know? She remembers that her mother always hated her magic, so she decides it's best to go back to Van, who's the one that really matters. Sometime later, Arut finally sets foot again in Van's territory. The welcome she gets is worthy of a hero, but Van notices she's a bit down and asks what happened. She opens up, saying she feels useless because she can't lead with the same confidence that Van has. Van, who's just the sweetest, tells her straight, "You did an amazing job. I don't get why you lack confidence when you control those puppets in such an incredible way." He also mentions that Panamera noticed how much happier she is now compared to when she lived with her father. Arut, totally melting, confesses it's because he treats her well. Van gives her that proud look, tells her she was amazing, and the girl breaks down in tears of relief. He welcomes her home, and she flashes that big smile of someone who finally feels like they belong somewhere. Time goes by, and Van, who can't sit still, just goes ahead and builds a shopping mall and a new inn right in the city center. While walking with Arut, he says he wants to see everyone living in total comfort. He remembers when he first got there and people barely had anything to eat, but now things have completely turned around. The city is buzzing, full of people of all races and ages getting along, which is rare, but here the vibe is different. The celebration is in full swing, Panamera is practically drowning in beer, Orzo is arguing with Sarah because she's stealing his meat, and the villagers are in that festival mood that only Van knows how to create. He pauses for a moment to reflect. He was born a noble, but since he only had production magic, which his father thought was worthless, he was sent off to the middle of nowhere. But it was in that backwater that he found his best friends and built his true home. He's there, feeling all grateful, when his sword clatters to the ground, reminding him it's time to hit the books hard. And that's not all. The other one shows up already wanting to train swordsmanship to turn Van into the greatest swordsman in the kingdom. The two start arguing over who gets to teach first, and Van takes advantage of the distraction and bolts, running for his life while yelling that he doesn't want to do any of that. His friends egg him on, shouting for him to run faster. As he runs through the streets of the city he built himself, Van remembers everything he's been through and vows to keep creating a place where everyone can have fun without any complications. And that's how this anime wraps up, an easy 9.5 out of 10. Comment the word city so I know you made it this far, and I'll give your comment a heart. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Without further ado, Rebobina says goodbye and see you next time.